kind of weak. Welcome to the Dental Board of California quarterly meeting. Today is Thursday, May 16th, 2019. I want to ask all of us to please turn our cell phones to silent and make sure they're off the table to avoid feedback noise. You may notice board members accessing their laptops during the meetings. They're using the laptop solely to access the board meeting materials that are in electronic format. This is an official meeting of the Dental Board of California. The board welcomes public comment on any item on the agenda, and it is the board's intent to ask for public comment prior to board taking action on an agenda item. And if you wish to speak on that item, please raise your hand and you will be recognized. Depending on the number of people who would like to testify on a particular item, a time limit may be imposed. We ask all speakers to please stay on topic, and if time limit is determined to be necessary, keep your comments to within that time limit. So I'm going to call this meeting to order. And first, I'd like to introduce, I think most of you have now met Michael Knotes, who is here today, who's on the legal team. So, Mr. Secretary, are you ready?
Good morning. Welcome to Game of Thrones, Dental Board of California. Burton present. Chan present. Chappelle Ingram absent. Lai.
Here.
Lai present. Laren. Laren present. Lay present. McKenzie. McKenzie present. Medina.
Here.
Medina present. Morrow present. Olagi absent. Pacheco present. Stewart present. Witcher present. You present. Madam President, we have a quorum.
Our first item today is the Executive Officer's Report, page 116.
Thank you, Madam President. My name is Karen Fisher, and I'm the Executive Officer of the Dental Board of California. I'm going to start with just sort of housekeeping. So staff today passed out the acknowledgments of the non-discrimination policy and the complaint procedure and the sexual harassment. If board members will make sure to sign all those off before you leave today and hand them in to staff, it would be much appreciated. I've also been told that the link to the sexual harassment prevention training has been sent to you, so you can take that in the convenience of your own home or at the office. It takes approximately 2 hours to complete. There's no quick way to get through it, so if you run into technical difficulties, give us a call. We'll try to walk you through that. So in addition to the meetings that I attended with Board President Fran Burton that she mentioned in her report yesterday, there were additional meetings that I attended since February. One of them is the Pro Rata work group that was established by the Executive Office. It actually consists of a number of executive officers from boards and bureaus, and it was convened by the Department of Consumer Affairs Executive Office in an effort to improve services and identify inefficiencies that are provided to boards and bureaus. Through its divisions, as we've discussed on many occasions, DCA provides centralized administrative services to all boards and bureaus. Most of these services are funded through the pro rata calculation, which is based on the number of positions that we have, and that then is charged to each board or bureau. The work group is tasked with determining what DCA services are critical and necessary, identifying friction points between DCA and boards and bureaus, and identifying high priority DCA business processes to study and to improve. And just as a reminder to the board, as we go through our budget, the board reported in its sunset review report that over the past 4 years, on average, the dental fund has spent approximately 11% of its budget on pro rata. The dental assisting fund has spent roughly 18% of its budget. The DCA did do a pro rata study, and that study is available if anybody is interested in looking at it. But they reported in their July 1st report to the legislature that the department identified the board had actually spent 16% or $2.25 million on pro rata out of our authorized expenditures, and 28% of our dental assisting fund, which is about $700,000. That's just for your information at this point. Another meeting that I attended was the director's quarterly meeting. That occurred on February 25th. It was the director's last meeting he had before leaving the department. They did introduce the new deputy secretary of the agency that will be involved with overseeing DCA, Lilia Mirashida, so we had an opportunity to meet with her. The different deputy directors gave their unit reports, so we heard from the legislative and regulatory unit, the admin unit, and of course we heard from the legal unit on their hopes to be able to establish a regulations unit. Sarah Wallace, the Assistant Executive Officer, and I have been involved in the development of the diversion program request for proposal. The diversion contract that the Department of Consumer Affairs has with the vendor Maximus is expiring at the end of the year. So the 8 programs that currently utilize the diversion program have been meeting to put together their request for proposal. The RFP does have to go out and bids have to be obtained, and then those need to be reviewed. So it's been a slow process, as you might imagine, trying to get 8 boards to agree on language of general provisions that will apply to all of us. I have to say, give a shout out to Maximus, who I've worked closely with over the last 7 years and believe they've done an excellent job. It's unknown whether or not they are actually going to put a bid in on the project. So we'll be updating you as that proceeds. As we mentioned yesterday, I attended the Sunset Review hearing. We had a wonderful breakfast with Cal Amos and was able to meet their leadership. Again, Sarah Wallace, our Assistant Executive Officer, and I met with representatives from the California Association of Orthodontists. They came to our office to speak, and it just so happens that they were having their annual meeting in Sacramento the following day, so we were invited to stop in, and we did. They expressed their concerns with the direct-to-consumer product that's out there that I won't name by name. I told them that the board is aware of their issue and an investigation is underway in that respect, and that we will keep them updated as best we can, though we cannot share a lot of information while investigations are going along. I also attended the Dental Hygiene Board meeting, which President Burton reported on yesterday. To give you an update, we did lose a member of our Dental Assisting Council. Pamela Davis Washington was one of the initial appointees to the DAC, and it was time she was eligible for another term, but she, under a great deal of consideration, she and her husband essentially determined that she was going to decline applying for an additional term. So upon hearing that information from her and essentially getting her resignation, we posted the recruitment notice for a Dental Assisting Council member. That application process closes May 31st this month. So applications will be forwarded to a subcommittee of the board for a review, and telephone interviews are typically done. So at the end of my report, I'll be asking the board president to essentially appoint a subcommittee to review those applications and conduct the telephone interviews. And if an appropriate candidate does appear, it would be the August meeting that candidate would be appointed to the board to serve on the DAC. We also have vacancy on the elective facial cosmetic surgery permit credentialing committee. Recruitment has gone out to that. We have 2 candidates that have expressed an interest. I'm going to be soliciting Dr. Witcher's help in evaluating those applications and conducting a telephone interview. Dr. Witcher, as you know, serves as the board liaison to the elective facial cosmetic surgery credentialing committee. That's a mouthful. To bring you up to date, in the last number of years, our staff has been growing, and we've essentially outgrown our space in Sacramento. And so we staff met with the Department of General Services, and we got the sign-off for the expansion of our suite. So we essentially are taking over 2 smaller suites, one that was formerly held by the Dental Hygiene Committee, and one that is currently held by the Physician's Assistant Committee. Now, things move slowly within the state, as we all know, so we've signed off on the plans. When actual construction will begin, we're not sure. So we will keep you posted as we go along. And perhaps one of the times we're in Sacramento, we can give you a tour of what our office will be looking like. I wanted to congratulate board members on your online voting for discipline. And I hope you all are sharing my enthusiasm. It's going well. We really don't have any tutorials going anymore. People seem to be getting online and voting. I think it's awesome that we can actually read the comments that people are putting down. So I'm very enthusiastic. Now, I did ask staff to hold off last week. You all received an email yesterday, and hopefully you don't check your email, but I see some people nodding that they received it. So 11 cases did go out yesterday. They wanted to actually send them out last week, and I said, no, we have a board meeting. I don't want you to freak them out. So, but the good news is that you'll have until June 10th to respond. So you'll have plenty of time to look at the cases. They're a combination of STIPs, proposed decisions, those types of things. So again, thank you for moving toward doing things electronically. This is a huge step, and if you have any concerns about that, you can contact me after the meeting, and I'd be happy to discuss it with you. I mentioned yesterday during our sunset review that SB 501, we're at the ready, if you will, assuming that the governor will sign the budget, the legislature will accept the budget. As soon as that goes through, we can start the recruitment process for the positions that we have designated to assist us in the implementation of SB 501. So we're looking forward to getting started on that and getting up and running. Next, I have my personnel update. So the executive office, which I consider myself, our assistant executive officer, and our enforcement chief, we're going to be expanding the management team, and we're going to be hiring an additional, we call him a staff services manager 2, and then we're going to create another level between the staff managers 2 and me. And the effort in that is given to that so that we can actually create a very strong management team so that if, as we know, EOs are appointed and they can come and they can go, that we're hoping the placement of this strong management team will sort of ease in that transition when it should occur. I'm not retiring, so at least not yet, not today, so that is in the works. In our administration unit, which now Wilbert is the manager of, we have 2 vacant positions that are critical to our operation, and those are the legislative and regulatory analyst. We had one that returned to his prior department, and that happened in February, shortly after our board meeting. And then our second analyst was a limited term, and he separated and I believe went over to work at the legislature, which is where he originally came from. So we are recruiting and hope to be filling that Leg-Reg position. As you know, that's a critical position for us, and we're hoping to get those filled as soon as possible. I do want to give a shout out to Pahua. If you're watching, board members are excited about meeting you. at the August meeting, and Pahua is our new Jerry. And so she's very excited about getting to know board members. You all probably received some sort of notice from her about your travel. She's going to take very good care of you, and we are very glad she's joined our team. We're looking forward to her attending the next meeting. In the licensing unit, so I'm sure you all are aware that cannabis is now part of the Department of Consumer Affairs, and cannabis is an enormous bureau. And I was telling somebody yesterday that we poached Wilbert from the budget office, and we try to poach really good people. Well, cannabis has poached some good people from us, unfortunately. So we had a number of people leave to go to work at cannabis. Some of them got promotions. Some of them, they made the choice because the location was closer to where they worked. And in our licensing unit is where we took a hit on that. So we are in the process of hiring 2 analysts and a program tech, and interviews are being conducted. Dental assisting program is also down some people. This is Tina's unit that she supervises, and so we're in the process of hiring an associated, a journey level analyst, a management services technician. So we're hoping to get that filled soon. We had one recent vacancy in the complaint and compliance unit. She left in May, so we'll be recruiting to fill that. The discipline coordination unit, of course, Adrienne left. She went to cannabis, and so we're recruiting for a discipline coordinator. We also have some vacancies in our investigative unit, and those interviews are moving forward. The field office in Sacramento is full. Yay. So that's still moving along. And the Orange office, there are 2 vacancies where we are trying to hire an investigator and a supervising investigator. So a lot of movement going on. I'm happy to report that those of us still there are picking up the slack. It's getting tight because we're getting into a period of time where applications now are flooding in for licenses and for exams. We try to compensate for that for offering anybody in the office who wants to do overtime to be able to keep up with the process. So as far as I know, we have no backlogs at this time. So last but not least, I wanted to conclude my comments by giving a heartfelt thank you to those members who nominated me to be an honorary fellow in the American College of Dentists. There are no words to explain how I feel. I came to the board, it's hard to believe, 10 years ago as an analyst to essentially coordinate the elective facial cosmetic surgery permit program. And never in my wildest dreams did I ever believe I'd go back to work full-time. I was working part-time. And it's hard to believe, but I came in 2009, and in December of 2012, the members at the time essentially voted me in as the interim executive officer, and I've held that position since then. You know, it's been said throughout the years that if you find something to do that you really love, you never really have to work a day in your life. Excuse me. When I came to the board, I found that, and I am eternally grateful to all of you for your friendships, your leadership, and to join my colleagues essentially as an honorary fellow is quite the honor. So thank you very much, and that concludes my remarks.
Okay, the first order of business, Karen reported the vacancies on the DAC. And so I'd like to appoint Dr. Witcher and Rosalinda Olagi, in her absence, as the subcommittee to review those applications and go through that process. Our next agenda item is number 14. which is the Dental Hygiene Board of California activities.
Good morning, Madam President, board members. I want to thank you for the opportunity to report on the Dental Hygiene Board activities before you today. I'm Anthony Lum. I'm the Executive Officer of the Dental Hygiene Board, and my President, Susan Good, sends her apologies for not being able to make it here. She had a scheduling conflict and she couldn't attend. So you have me. In April, we conducted our first official in-person board meeting as a board. And because of all the work and it being right in the middle of the legislative session, the board determined to change from scheduling 2 meetings per year to 3. And that's going to start in 2020. I want to thank President Burton and Executive Officer Fisher for attending our meetings and always reporting the activities of the dental board to us. That's very appreciated. Also, as a result of our meetings, we're promulgating more regulations this year than ever in the past. So that's been keeping us very busy. And items like retired license, mobile dental clinics for RDHAPs, that's Registered Dental Hygienists in Alternative Practice. Assembly Bill 2138 deals with convictions as related to the applications for licensure. The RDM and ITR regulations the dental hygiene educational programs appeal process, probation, and citation and fine are just a few of the regulations that we're currently working on. We're also continuing the review of our dental hygiene educational programs and finding minor to moderate deficiencies of the law at each site. They haven't been reviewed in quite a while, so when we're going in, we're anticipating to find some deficiencies, and we're identifying them with the school and working closely with them to correct it. As of January 1st, we obtained the authority to conduct unannounced school site visits and the ability to place a school on probation and cite and fine them if we find deficiencies of the law. Once regulations are promulgated and approved, we'll implement those measures if needed. Overall, though, the schools have been very cooperative and are communicating more with us to come into compliance and are very collaborative in our efforts. We continue to fill our vacant positions to address the board's work. Recently, we filled 2 positions. One's our receptionist position, and the other one was our probation monitor position. And we still have 2 more to go. We have an analyst position in each of our licensing and enforcement programs. So we'll be working on those diligently as well. We were also recently informed that our budget change proposals for this year were approved. So we're going to be obtaining 3 additional positions as of July 1st to address our workload, and that'll be much needed positions to help us with our mandates. So in total, we'll have 13 positions, which is basically double the amount of staff positions that we've had since I started at the board 7.5 years ago. So we're looking to grow as our workload increases, and there's never a dull day, so I'm enjoying the entire process. I also want to congratulate you all on making it through your sunset review hearing and hope for a smooth sailing as your sunset bill goes through the legislature. I know at the current time the bill is just a shell of what the content should be, but I wanted to inform you that the Dental Hygiene Board submitted a letter of support for your sunset bill. I want to thank you again for the continued collaboration and cooperation that we've received from the dental board. And that concludes my report. There's also one other thing. I believe Wilbert handed out some handouts to you. Included on that is our new Dental Hygiene Board ginormous business card, as I like to call it. It's something that we created to hand out at outreach events. And so I wanted you all to have a copy in case you have individuals that come up to you in regards to our board and for contact information and for information about obtaining a license to be a dental hygienist. So are there any questions?
Do want to thank you on behalf of the board for your support of AB 1519. Thank you so much. And thank you for your report.
President Burton. I have a question. Thank you for presenting your report to us. I am curious to know what was the justification or the impetus for you to initiate unannounced site visits?
Well, what we found is that when we go into a school without the unannounced site visits, we have to notify them weeks in advance. And a lot of times we were deferred as far as an actual date that we could go into the school to review what their program is. So we found that when we went in, they had plenty of time to set up their schools to obviously comply with the law. Information that we had received prior to going to that school and even being informed of issues at the school, when we went in there, everything was, quote, cleaned up and in orderly fashion. So we found that by requesting to have authority to go in unannounced, that would give us the opportunity to see how the school is actually operating.
With that said, at this date and time, have you conducted any unannounced site visits? And if so, what has been the results from those visits?
No, to date, because we just received the authority as of January 1st, we have not conducted any unannounced site visits, and we would only do so if it's warranted. You know, if we received a complaint about the school or something of that nature, we wouldn't necessarily just go nilly-willy and come by school X just because we're in the neighborhood. We would have to probably use a cause to go in there and review the school.
Good. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Tony, I'm interested in knowing how many applicants do you get from other countries to try to receive licenses here in California? What is the average intake of foreign trained dentists or hygienists coming from a different country?
Actually, in the way that our law is structured, the individual must graduate from either a dental hygiene board approved school or a CODA accredited school. So at the current time, we don't accept any foreign degrees. I get a number of inquiries about foreign, either from foreign dentists or hygienists that want to come here to practice. But the way our law is structured, they would need to complete the program, either CODA accredited or California approved.
So there are like IDS programs for hygienists.
There are what?
IDS kind of international study programs for hygienists as well in California.
I have not looked internationally, but I'm just going off of the emails that I do receive. Mm-hmm. And individuals from their respective countries have indicated that they are working in dental hygiene. So they're describing it, and so they inquire how do they obtain a California license.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
What's your current registration? How many total licensees do you have?
Oh, how many total?
Mm-hmm.
We've issued close to 33,000 licenses, and the active population is roughly 24,000.
Okay. Any other questions?
President Burton. Do you accept an equivalent dental hygiene education from Canada?
From Canada?
Yes.
Yes. CODA has, I believe, an agreement with Canadian approved schools. As long as they're CODA accredited, then we would accept their completion of the programs.
So that's consistent with CODA accepting dental education programs from Canada as being equivalent to CODA schools.
Just a reminder to members with this feedback, you need to pull the mic close so that you can be heard. Any other questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Don't go away.
Okay.
Our next item is item 15, a discussion and possible action regarding the DHBC's proposed draft educational regulatory language for California Code of Regulations, Title 16, Section 1109, relating to radiographic decision-making and interim therapeutic restoration courses for the registered dental hygienist.
I'm ready? Okay. This request from my board to the dental board for agreement on our proposed regulations for radiographic decision-making, or RDM, and interim therapeutic restorations, or ITR. A little bit of background on this. Assembly Bill 1174, Statutes of 2014, provided additional authority for dental hygienists to determine which radiographs, or x-rays, to perform on a patient who hasn't initially been seen or examined by a supervising dentist for the purpose of the dentist making a diagnosis and treatment plan for the patient. This is identified as radiographic decision-making. The bill also provided authorization for dental hygienists to place protective restorations identified as interim therapeutic restorations, or ITRs, and define them as a direct provisional restoration placed to stabilize a tooth until a licensed dentist could diagnose the need for further treatment. Pursuant to Business and Professions Code Section 1910.5, the Dental Hygiene Board was to adopt regulations to establish requirements for courses of instruction for the procedures authorized for a registered dental hygienist in alternative practice, and registered dental hygienist in extended functions using the competency-based training protocols established by the Health Workforce Pilot Project number 172 through the Office of the Statewide Health Planning and Development. There's a copy that was distributed to you, and I apologize for the 11th hour copy of this pilot project, but that should be in front of you as well, and I'm just going to refer to it a couple of times. The mandate states that any subsequent amendments to the curriculum regulations, meaning our regulations, that differed from the HWPP pilot project and promulgated by the Dental Hygiene Board shall be agreed upon by the Dental Board and the Dental Hygiene Board. Our proposed regulatory language, which is in your meeting materials, parallels the pilot project except for 3 specific proposed amendments to the language that my board reviewed. We started these reviews back in November, and then we finalized it in late January. My original intent was to present this to you at your February meeting, but we didn't get the draft completed in time to be a part of your February meeting materials. So the proposed amendments in your meeting materials, I highlighted them in yellow, so that way they're easily identified. But when we created our regulations, the Dental Hygiene Board identified 3 amendments that were needed to move forward. The changes to the proposed language, which I just said, are in your meeting materials highlighted in yellow. And basically, the first one is the RDM and ITR course curriculum was split into 2 courses. The initial assumption was that it was going to be one complete course. However, the author of the ITR language structured his continuing education program into 2 separate courses. So we just paralleled how specifically Dr. Paul Glassman teaches his CE courses. So this will be done in our dental hygiene educational programs and also any CE courses that are created external of Dr. Glassman's course. The second change that we discussed and approved was to use the term interim adhesive protective restorations in the clinical training sections of the regulation to clarify that the intent of this procedure is a temporary intervention and not intended for a long-term solution. In your meeting materials, this reflects the language on pages 125 to 126, and in the pilot project, it's on page 3. So you can compare those and see what the difference is. Basically just adds the term interim in there. The third amendment that we did was also that it determined that the follow-up appointment schedule existing in the pilot program was too frequent for patients receiving these services to adhere to. Rather than the original follow-up examination schedule of 1 week, 3 weeks, 1 week, 3 months, 6 months, and 1 year to check on the ITR status, we believe the schedule to be amended to 2 follow-up examinations within a 12-month period is more feasible for these types of patients to follow up in treatment. And that's indicated on page 126 of your meeting materials in the middle of the page. It's numbered V(i)(i). So what I'm requesting today is that you review this, and I ask for your agreement on these changes to the proposed RDM and ITR regulations to move forward in the regulatory process for us. Just FYI, but in the regulatory process, there is future opportunities for the public or interested stakeholders to make comments throughout the process. Any questions?
Thank you for being here and presenting, your proposed changes. I have a couple of questions. The first one is, why do the Dental Hygiene Board felt there was a need to change the terminology to interim adhesive protective restorations? And as you said, what's in here is to make clear the intent that this procedure is an interim intervention. Mm-hmm. Really, the word interim in ITR already indicates this interim. So I don't see the need to change it to this, because if you read the whole, a proposal, it's inconsistent. To me, it's really unnecessary to change it. To change the terminology, number one, and number two, is confusing. There are 2 places where you change the terminology, but then throughout the entire, text, it still refers to ITR. So I'm just wondering why you do that.
Correct, and the discussion that we had back in our November meeting, it was brought up by our dentist member as far as the language that was specifically identified, and when we were reading over the pilot project, it is on page 3 of the training protocols, where even though it's talking about ITRs throughout that process, the board determined that by identifying this specific area to change to interim would just parallel what's already talking about as far as ITRs. Because in the training protocol, in the language of the handout that was distributed to you, it just indicates adhesive protective restorations. So by adding that interim in front of it, it just made it clear that it would be an interim adhesive.
Well, it sounds to me like, one is the procedure, the other one is the technique. So now you're looking at, like, in the materials could change in the future, and really, ITR is ITR. It's interim therapeutic restoration. Okay. And I think that the rationale that you put here is to make it clear that the intent of the procedure is interim. You're basically saying the same thing. Mm-hmm. So I'm just curious why the change. And I understand it's in the pilot project where this, where they use that terminology. But in the legal context, I think that it should be something that's universally accepted and understood, and that is ITR, and not the interim adhesive protective restoration, because it's really not a protective restoration. It is an interim therapeutic restoration.
And again, I think that issue was just brought up just because of the language in the pilot project training protocol. That was the only reason.
As I said, it's unnecessary and it's confusing.
Okay.
If you used it in like 2 areas, and the rest of the proposed language still refers to ITR.
Okay.
Dr. Morrow? Oh, wait, hang on just a second.
Oh.
Finish your thought.
Okay. So the second concern that I have is during the pilot project, I understand Dr. Paul Glassman recommended the 1 week, the 3 month and the 6 month and all that. It was during the demonstration project. Now that we translate it into real practical, clinical, setting, you want to change it to twice a year. Mm-hmm. And the purpose of ITR is that it's an interim restoration, then it's not a definitive treatment. So my understanding is that the dental hygienist can go in and do that, but there should be a referral made to a local dentist for definitive treatment. And if you don't do that, then it seems to me this restoration will be considered or perceived by the public as permanent restoration. So I think that's something that I'm concerned about, because I don't see anywhere in here where it says that the referral for definitive treatment will be taking place.
So you're saying a referral for the follow-up treatment? Okay.
Yeah, because it is interim. So if you really, how long can an interim be interim?
It was, and this is just my understanding. I understand that you've identified that it's not in the language, but it was my understanding that when a dental hygienist does go in and do this procedure, that they do provide a follow-up to a licensed dentist to review the progression or status of the ITR.
That is my understanding from the demonstration project. Mm-hmm. But in this language, I don't see that. Okay. And what I'm worried about is that the public, if they think that they received this interim restoration, and then they need to come back to see the hygienist in 6 months, and then again in 6 months, they may perceive that this is a permanent restoration, whereas it is not. Mm-hmm. The patient still needs to receive definitive treatment provided by a dentist.
You're finished? Okay. Dr. Morrow?
Thank you. If I could draw your attention to page 125, under item D, approximately halfway down the page, under A, patient factors, identifying the factors as far as the patient eligibility for this interim restoration. Patient is, number 2, patient is cooperative enough to have the interim restoration placed without the need of special protocols, and then you have including sedation and physical support. What other factors are considered special protocols, and where does the need or the ability to provide this restorative procedure without local anesthesia?
I wish I could go into detail on that. Like I said, we paralleled the language to the pilot project, and since I'm not a practitioner, I would feel very uncomfortable with answering that question.
Okay, one of the reasons why is I happen to have been representative of the dental board to the pilot project, and it was very clearly understood and stated that the patient, this interim protective adhesive restoration must be placed on a patient that does without the use of local anesthesia. And I am not seeing that in your terminology.
Just a question back, but doesn't number 2 state that? The restoration placed without the need for special protocols, including sedation or physical support.
What are those other protocols? Because sedation is not local anesthesia.
Okay. I will need to look through that and compare that to the pilot project.
Thank you.
Dr. Chan?
Good morning, Tony.
Good morning.
This is the first time I've seen the document on the pilot project, but and I might have missed it in the materials that we've received, but is there part of the protocol to do an informed consent, which would follow up with Dr. Lay's comment about clearly stating it's an interim? And then the second piece is the introduction of the material fact sheet part of this protocol that we dentists must present to our patients before we put anything in their mouth?
Again, we paralleled the language like the protocols in the pilot project. As far as specifics like that, I'm not a practitioner and I wouldn't feel comfortable answering a question to that extent.
Dr. Stewart?
Thank you. As someone that was involved in the pilot project, I want to support the Dental Hygiene Board in this manner. And my memory takes me back to some locations that were very, very difficult to get care to a very, very sick patient. And I remember watching the RDHAP take care of and place an ITR on a patient in one of those situations that would have been very difficult to get a dentist to, and yet there she was taking care of someone in a very loving, kind, gentle way, and it's not the kind of dentistry that we're gonna be able to provide in our office, but it is a stopgap measure. It does slow down the decay process, and it has the potential to decrease pain and increase comfort. And these people are working in a very difficult environment, and so I would suggest that we keep in mind the population that is being served here, and they're getting care that otherwise they might not be getting. And so it seems like it's taken years to get this process moving even to this point, and I would hope that we don't get stuck in some of these details, but keep the bigger picture in mind, and that these folks are being trained and they're providing care to a very needy population in very difficult circumstances. So I would just support Dr. Glassman's efforts. I would support the dental board, the Dental Hygiene Board's efforts to move this forward, and I just so appreciate those difficult environments and someone that's willing to go in there and be the professional that they are and help. Thank you.
Dr. Lay?
Dr. Stewart, I appreciate your passion and also your comment. But I'm one of those providers. So I go, I do a lot of this. My staff actually does a lot of those things that nobody else will see them. I think that we are here to serve with a mission of public protection, and I do think that transparency is important. The consent form is to tell the patients that this is interim, and I understand that there are not enough dental providers out there that accept Denti-Cal, and therefore a lot of these patients may not be able to access care. And yes, it is a good stopgap, service. However, even within the project, the demonstration project, it was clearly stated that there would be referral of these patients to providers to receive definitive treatment. And I don't want the public to have that perception, that false perception, that this is permanent restoration. And if we don't address that, we are allowing, the perception, the public perception that this is permanent restoration because we don't speak up. And I think that's something that we need to make sure that is on the record, that we are addressing it and that we understand and that we want to inform the public. This is not a permanent restoration. It is, an interim restoration. And I want to make it very clear. The public needs to know that. Our job is to protect the public. And if we agree to leave it alone and not address that, then basically we're saying it's okay. You can receive this restoration and you can think it is permanent and it's perfectly fine with us.
Dr. Witcher?
If we have our own version of this, regulation, and the language was taken more or less directly from the pilot project language as far as the training protocols go, and the hygiene committee has done the same thing. If you take the two regulations and put them side by side and compare them with the pilot project, the language is identical. For instance, the protocol that Dr. Morrow brought up is on page 9 under your criteria for ITR replacement. In other words, there was a discussion of lack of specificity of the language regarding protocols. It says special protocols including sedation or physical support. That's actually in the document from the pilot project with the model language. So, if we want to reopen the discussion of what's in the pilot project, we can do that. But my understanding was everybody was going to accept this and move it forward. And the exception, of course, would be the 3 amendments that Tony called to our attention. So, if board members need the opportunity to go back and look at our own language and compare that to both the pilot project and Dental Hygiene Board's proposal, maybe we're not ready to take action on it. But I think Tony's done a really good job outlining the differences. Thank you.
Any other comments? Ms. Medina?
I just wanted to find out then what would be the recommendation if
Pull
we're
your
looking,
microphone closer, please.
if we're looking at what was mentioned earlier regarding looking at the safety of the patients, of the consumers. So then what is a recommendation of looking at not approving it because it is a temporary, and patients unfortunately from low-income communities, they can automatically assume that it is permanent. So I was just curious on the recommendations for that one.
don't think anybody could hear you.
Okay, so then the question was regarding the interim, the adhesive protective. I'm wondering what the recommendation from those that were concerned with patients or consumers being affected, thinking that this might be a permanent, what would be the recommendation? Can you hear me now? So I'm thinking, would it be to where we're not approving the highlighted area? Is that what we're doing today? Or we're approving the highlighted area? Was there a vote today? I wasn't sure if that was something that you were looking at us approving or not approving.
No, we're looking for agreement on the language that's highlighted in your materials.
I just wanted
Correct.
to clarify that.
Mhm.
Okay.
Dr. Lay?
So my first comment regarding the change in the terminology, I think is more of my own opinion, that is inconsistent, with the ITR, unless you're thinking of developing like a different ADA code or something. But anyway, my main concern is really the patient protection, the patient perception of what it is, the procedure, the restoration, the service. That's a bigger concern to me if it's not clearly stated. That is this interim, the definitive treatment is required by a general provider. And I understand that there's in some underserved areas, you may not be able to link up with a local practice or local clinics, but I can tell you there are enough clinics out there that you can work with. You just need to find them and link up with them.
Just a small comment on that. Would it be the responsibility of the practitioner to ensure that their patient is informed that it is an interim, so that way they are aware that they need to come to a dentist for follow-up? I mean, it's something where I think some of the responsibility should be on the practitioner, and I would hope that these courses that we would eventually approve for licensees to gain through CE or through the educational programs, that they would convey that message, that since it is an interim technique, that this message needs to be conveyed to your patient.
If you go back to the pilot project, it does say in there, or at least from what I could recall from Dr. Paul Glassman's presentation, and that was there is a linkage to a provider. He made it very clear to us, and the consent also included that. So I think informing the patient that it's interim, it's temporary, is one thing, but there needs to be the next step, and that is to help the patients get definitive treatment. And that's something that I feel is not being addressed clearly here.
And I'm not completely familiar with the dental law that the dentists have to follow, but I'm just going off of my own experience. When I got a temporary crown, I mean, my dentist told me it's a temporary crown, and it was up to my responsibility to follow up with that individual to have further treatment. So I'm looking at it from these individuals that are providing and obtaining the services of the ITR, that the practitioner could probably do the same and say that this is not a permanent item. You need to have follow-up dental care, and it'll be, I can refer you to this dentist, but it'll be your responsibility to follow up with that care.
I'm sorry. No, I understand that. It's the responsibility of the patient, to go see, a dentist in order to get definitive. But it needs to go into the dental hygienist who places this, to also let the patient know that you need to go see a dental provider for definitive treatment, and it's not clear enough.
Okay, point taken. Dr. Witcher.
I think we all need to remember this goes back to the authorizing statute behind these regs and the content that's in there and the direction that was given, which was to basically take the language in the protocols and put that into regulation. And since our regs follow that direction, and these do too, I think the point of discussion is really the three changes Tony asked for, dividing the course into two components, one for ITR, one for determination of radiographs. The other is the change in the definition of ITR, and the third is the recall interval. And maybe we could, I don't know, in an attempt to move this along or decide we're not ready to move it along, maybe we could go around the room and just speak to those three issues. I personally have no problem with dividing the course into two courses. I think that's actually probably a good idea because, as Tony said, that's the way it's taught. Regarding the language, I agree with Dr. Lay. I think the modified language is confusing, and let's just stick with a term that's been around for several years. We all know what it means. Regarding the recall interval, I would have to defer to Dr. Lay on that. I just don't know what would be sufficient in this patient population because they see me for different services. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go to Dr. Stewart, and then we're going to go to Ms. Fisher, and then we're going to end this conversation.
I just want to try to paint a picture because the patients that I saw in the facilities that we visited, those folks, it takes a tremendous amount of effort to get that person into a clinic or into an office. They're lying in a bed, they're immobile, and they don't have the opportunity to move like so many of us do. So it is the sickest of the sick, and it's the people that need the most care, and it's not always easy, it's not always possible to get those folks to a place where more definitive care can be. And in my opinion, the care that's being provided there is a step in the right direction and not something that we should slow down or stop. Because I think that the three amendments are non-substantive, and they really are no reason to slow this process down. And I would once again just would support that. Thank you.
Okay. The Dental Hygiene Board has the authority to move forward. They brought this to the board as a courtesy. There's no requirement for them to bring this language before us. So I'm trying to see what the board's will is to move forward. They already have adopted this language and essentially can move forward regardless of what the board chooses to say or do. And then we would have the opportunity to essentially make formal comments in the regulatory process. That being said, I think that it's important to convey the concerns that the board may have with the proposed changes, if there are any concerns with the proposed changes. And we could do so at this time, either at this meeting or shortly thereafter the meeting. If those with concerns would want to send me the information, I could send it off to the Dental Hygiene Board immediately just to express any concerns that the board may have. But the Dental Hygiene Board has the authority to move this through. They didn't have to bring this before the board, and they did. I think that Tony's getting additional information. Moving forward, it would be nice if we would get to discuss this before you initiate your language. We recognize you have certainly the authority to move forward without what the board says, but in an effort to try to keep the lines of communication open between the two boards, on the one hand, we appreciate you bringing it here, but if you're not prepared to take the comments, why do that? Why bring it to the board? So we'll work toward deciding how best to achieve moving forward on how to handle these issues, to try to make it as efficient for everybody. So that brings us back to essentially what Dr. Witcher and Dr. Stewart were trying to say, the bulk of this regulatory process essentially is verbatim out of statute, or about the pilot program. If you have specific concerns about what they want to amend, you need to just let us know how you want to move forward with that. From what I understood in terms of the definition, the interim therapeutic restoration, sometimes apparently people use permanent cement as opposed to something that isn't permanent. And that's how the discussion went. So to sort of siphon out what Dr. Lay has said, interim therapeutic restoration in itself should define that you need to be using adhesive that's not permanent. But the Dental Hygiene Board had this discussion, and their recommendation from their dentist was that perhaps that needed further clarification. So with that information now, I don't know if this moves the conversation forward, but let's entertain a motion to do something, either to agree with what concerns you have, or but just recognize, I think that the comments you've made are important, but the Dental Hygiene Board, I think it's important to let them know, but they don't have to do anything with it.
So given that, I'm going to move that we move this forward, and that we work through the executive officer to register any concerns that we have. But I don't want to see this process being held up.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Any public comment? I'm sorry, Burton. Yeah, Witcher. Accept the language.
Mary McCune, California Dental Association. So CDA has some concerns around the proposed amendment to rename ITR to Interim Adhesive Protective Restoration. CDA consulted Dr. Paul Glassman, who is the project director for the HWPP, and he confirmed that glass ionomer was the appropriate material to be used during these placements, and that the proposed amendment to the regulations would expand the types of materials that could be used, and those materials, that expansion would include materials that would be inappropriate for ITR placement.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Paul Ruggiardo. I'm a pediatric dentist, and I have concerns about the substitution of the interim adhesive protective restoration terminology, that it would be and is very confusing, I think, to the practitioners and the public on that terminology rather than the terminology in the statute for protective restoration. There exist several variants of types of non-definitive restorations. The protective restoration is a recognized procedure. The interim therapeutic restoration is a recognized procedure. The atraumatic or alternative restorative technique restoration is an established procedure. There are also other terminologies that are not coded by the ADA, the stabilizing restoration, the temporary restoration, and I think it's very unclear if the interim adhesive protective restoration is used, which of those 5 other entities are being referred to. That the interim therapeutic restoration is recognized as a definitive, as a recognized procedure in the American Academy of Pediatric Dentistry's guidelines and policies and best practices. I have copies of those, which I'll give you for the record. But I would speak against changing this, and I would recommend using terminology that is recognized within the profession and recognized by the public.
I don't think that's what I'm saying, that I'm asking that
I did have a comment, but this was before you called up on the public comments. I said I did have a comment before you called up the public comments. I was not sure if that was okay. I'm coming from a different perspective. I am one of those that came from low-income communities, and our children didn't have the luxury of attending a regular dentist where they were able to notify you of all of these, or you didn't have enough money to go back to get the permanent. So, I mean, you have to also look at, when you look at words and how it's being sent to the patients or the patients' families and what they can do, it's not always a luxury for them to come back. And so with that, just looking at the terminology, it does, or if it's not being said appropriately to the patients, it can have an impact. It can have an impact. And so when you use the word interim, many might not know what interim means. And so just keeping that in, I know that this is something you're bringing forward, but just keep that in mind, that when you look at certain words, that it makes sense to the patients as well. And so I agree with the word temporary. If there was a way they could look at changing the interim word, maybe to something that's simple as temporary.
Mary with CDA again. I also wanted to point to the BMP Code Section 1910.5, subsection C, just to clarify how the regulations from the Hygiene Board should be promulgated. It says that any amendments to the regulations for ITR curriculum that are promulgated by the Hygiene Board shall be agreed upon by the board and the Hygiene Board. In this case, board means dental board. So I did want to put that out there as well, that under CDA's interpretation of the statute, the current regulations before you can't finish the promulgation or the rulemaking process until there is agreement between the two boards.
Anything else? Again, I want to make it clear that this process will not end here. Get your comments to the executive officer, and we will filter those through her back to DHCC. So with that, there's been a motion and a second. I'm going to call for the question.
Burton.
Aye.
Burton, aye. Chan, nay. Chappelle Ingram, absent. Lay. Abstain. Laren, aye. Lay. Repeat. Lay, nay. Mackenzie. Abstain. Medina.
No.
Dina, no. Morrow, no. Alagis, absent. Pacheco, aye. Stewart,
Yes.
yes. Witcher, yes. You, no. Okay, what do I do now?
If I'm reading this total correctly, there are 5 ayes and 5 nays and 2 abstentions. Is that right? The motion would fail for lack of a majority. So what I might suggest is somebody potentially voice a different motion that might provide for majority agreement.
Okay, so I'm going to try something else. And it would be the second part of my suggestion, and that is that the board take no position, but that we get our concerns that we've raised today to the executive officer so she can transmit those to DHCC expeditiously. It's been suggested that the concerns that you raised today be those that you forward and that you not forward anything new.
I'll second that.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the end of that? Not forward anything new?
That only those issues that have been raised today be forwarded as concerns, and that your comments not be anything that was not discussed today. Do not raise anything new. Not my suggestion. Do you have a comment?
I think I'm just confused on what that means from, like, if that's a motion, that putting forward the comments from today, but nothing new from today, or nothing new going forward. I'm sure it's probably just only my confusion. I don't know.
Well, I'm going to let her respond to that.
What I was suggesting is that in light of the motion that the executive officer carried to the dental hygiene board, the board's concerns that have been expressed, that it's limited to the board's concerns that have been expressed today, as opposed to board members individually contacting the executive officer, so that when the concerns are expressed to the hygiene board, they've been discussed today and it's not something that hasn't been discussed in open session.
But could it be clarified, sorry. Could it be clarified then what the concern is, just to make sure that we're on the same agreement? I mean, I know for myself it was the wording interim, and to be recommended to switch from interim to temporary. Is that, so I just want to clarify what the main concern, just so we can be on the same page with that, if that's the case.
So, Ms. Medina, the procedure is called an interim therapeutic restoration. That's a term of the profession. I think what you're getting at is a real concern, but I don't believe that it necessarily would be taken care of in regulation. I think that the providers of the procedure should be taking the time to let people know that it's a temporary procedure. Do you see the distinction between what it's called? It's called an interim therapeutic restoration by the profession, but the dentist should, and the providers, the hygienist should make sure that the patient is aware it's a temporary procedure. I don't see that. The statute essentially calls it an interim therapeutic restoration. So to change that would probably require a statutory change.
Okay, and so then will they be, so the recommendation would be to add that language into this?
No, I think that, and the dentist can speak to this on the board. I think the dentist and the hygienist should be telling the patients it's a temporary fix. I don't think necessarily anything needs to be clarified in statute or regulation.
So then what's the recommendation that we're putting forward for them to take into effect that would change anything? And I'm curious in what's, I don't understand. I'm sorry.
Well,
if we're putting that into that, in essence, we can't, what we're recommending can't necessarily be added, because you're saying that it's something that the physicians have to do themselves. So if it's, I don't understand then, what's the purpose of us
And I'm
making
gonna
a recommendation?
I'm going to defer to the dentists on the board to try to respond to Ms. Medina.
We've not heard from Dr. Lai. Let's hear from Dr. Lai.
So to answer your question, to me, my opinion is on both sides, the dentists and the dental hygienists are trying to come to a solution to help people. Okay, I believe that the wording is important because the materials are different. Now, what I'm reading here as interim adhesive protective restoration. So you can protect the tooth from breaking apart by putting a GI, which is a glass ionomer. You can put some type of cement, permanent cement, that is used for this purpose. You can put an IRM, which is like a plaster of Paris, that has a sedative effect. You can place amalgam and say that is a temporary. But the thing is, for me, as access to care, I hate to use that word all the time, but there should be a standard. Poor people, rich people, they all should have the same, right? You know, that's what we're trying to achieve. Everybody's equal, right? So the language, when it's open, when it's so vague, some people that are trying to say, well, you know, I've used this, it works well. But it could be an irritant. Or I've used this and it wedges the tooth and cracks the tooth more. So we're trying to get a standard where it's fair for equal to in every situation for everybody. And so I think the semantics of well, it should be GI, which was there in the original project, now switch to something just stuffed or trying to connect the tooth back together as an interim is important. So I don't believe it's as easy as saying, oh, we should do this, we should do that. You know, the wording should be different. I think we have to go back to where Dr. Glassman has put this great project together and how we could expand upon it where more people are being taken care of. So I think hopefully that helps you understand. It's not nitpicking where dentists want more control or hygienists want more control. No, we want to get a solution where everybody can be helped in a certain way, but with the proper material, and not later on have an issue where, oh, they put in a cement that actually irritated the tooth or broke the tooth more. And then we're on the back side of that. So it's better to take care of it in the front side of it rather than to backtrack and say, oh, we really didn't mean that. But that's my opinion. Hopefully that helps you.
Does that help you?
That gives me so I know I heard from several of the board regarding that they support the process and how they've adjusted changes, which I'm okay with. I guess what I was looking at was the wording, how it's going to be sent or disseminated back to the patient. That was my concern. If it's not in here, would that be part of the ethics? I really don't know how, what that looks like, because I know for a fact that it's not necessarily being disseminated as appropriately. But I don't know if that's part of this process or not, but I was just looking at the word interim. But I thank you for explaining that process, though.
Dr. Laren?
Excuse me. Ms. Medina, I think your answer, what you need to advise the patient is that it's interim, right? That the proper language. What we do as general dentists, and I do in my office, we just, like Dr. Chan said, is that consent form. The consent form, even though it's not in language, we always give the consent form, and it explains very clearly what we're doing and what materials, and that's the most important document that we give the patient. And in there, like Dr. Thomas said, they're in a situation that, I mean, you could not do a silver filling over there. You could not do a restoration with composite. All you're going to be able to do is something very temporary, and you will be advised. The patient will be advised with that consent form. That's very important.
Dr. Morrow.
Thank you. The recommendation as written indicates that the patient or responsible party has provided consent for the ITR procedure. My understanding is that there's a significant difference between consent and informed consent. And I think it would be valuable to consider adding the word informed consent, which would cover the responsibility of the provider, the practitioner, whether that be a dental hygienist or a dentist, that the patient or the responsible party was informed and provided informed consent, which is a different level of consent than simply consent. Some people say, well, the patient sat in my chair, opened their mouth, and let me do what I did, so therefore I had implied consent. That is not informed consent from a legal standpoint, or I think from a practice standpoint.
So could that be the recommendation then, adding the word informed?
Again, I suggest that the Dental Hygiene Board consider adding the term informed consent rather than simply consent.
I just have a question for legal. Since that wasn't part of the initial proposal on the 3 amendments, is that something that can be considered? I do have a recommendation that we could use just to save everybody some time, because the 3 recommendations that we have are, that I haven't heard any issues with, is splitting the ITR and RDM course into 2 separate courses, and the follow-up care for twice in 12 months. But the main sticking point seems to be this interim dialogue that we're having, and I had no clue as being a layperson that it would cause so much discussion, to be honest. So with the proposal to try and get the board's approval and move this forward, could I suggest that we just remove the interim and keep it at the original language and move the regulatory package forward at that point? Because if the other 2 issues there's no problems with the other amendments, then we can obtain your agreement and move it forward.
Mr. Lum, I'm sorry, was there a question for?
Oh, I'm sorry. The first part of that was the informed consent form. There was nothing on the agenda about an informed consent form. So
Well,
can
the
that
agenda
be-
item is possible action with respect to the proposed regulation. So while your memo did set out those 3 items, I don't think that the board's purview is that limited. So the board could say, we would suggest the hygiene board make such and such an amendment.
Okay.
Now, whether or not the hygiene board wants to do that is a different issue.
Correct. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. We have a motion. Are we? You didn't write it down. Okay. I think that it was something to the effect that we would convey our concerns to the executive officer who would get those to DHCC expeditiously. I believe that was what it was. And were you the second? And do you remember it like that?
I think there was a provision that we would only send forward things, recommendations that were discussed at this meeting.
And if I'm going to interject at this point because I think that there's a huge level of uncertainty. I would ask both the proposer and the second to withdraw your motion and ask that we table this, and that if we table it, that those people who have their concerns go ahead and send that to me. But as Sarah has pointed out, this is the first time the board has really looked at the language at all, and we haven't had a chance to discuss all the language, even the language that's being proposed to tweak. So I think that it's making people a bit uncomfortable about moving this forward, and so the recommendation is to table it. Staff will continue to work with the Hygiene Board and to try to get further clarification. But I think we're pretty clear on what some of the concerns are. Sarah, do you have additional comment?
I would just ask that if we do end up tabling it, that any additional concerns after this discussion also be sent to Karen and I, so that we can continue working with the Dental Hygiene Board on this, and that we'll bring it back to a future meeting.
Now, how that's different from what our legal counsel had said before in terms of notifying the executive officer of the concerns only spoken here, this is different because we are just going to ask board members to read this agenda item a little more closely, and if something wasn't discussed today, send it to our attention. It will come back to the board to discuss all those issues.
My only question with respect to that approach would be, I think of Mr. Lum, which is that, as I understand it, the Hygiene Board does not need Dental Board approval of these regs. So I don't know what the Hygiene Board's decision would be with moving forward with this package, and I wouldn't want to see this board divested of its opportunity to express its concerns. And maybe only Mr. Lum can answer that question. I don't know.
Do you agree with CDA's interpretation that 1910.5C requires the board to agree?
I think that was a question to you.
I think it's for legal.
Okay.
And I'm going to actually withdraw the question, and we'll give our legal counsel the opportunity to look at that at a future meeting. So we'll identify whether or not we can or should be working collaboratively with the Hygiene Committee, and therefore I think that emphasizes why we should be tabling this. And if you would like to, a time certain, which I would say let's try to get to this as soon as possible, definitely by the August meeting.
Just
Take
one
a motion?
one question. Would the board be open to, like I said, eliminating this interim word where we're stuck at for our language? Would you be comfortable with agreeable to move this language forward if that was removed, which would basically parallel back what's in the pilot project?
Well, I think the issue is not with the word interim. I understand where Ms. Medina is coming from, but I think what Dr. Rijardo had stated was that interim adhesive protective restoration is different than ITR. So the interim isn't the key there. It's the whole phrase. And does essentially interim adhesive protective restoration change the scope of what hygienists are doing? the testimony we heard, and I'm a lay person, the testimony we heard was that the interim adhesive protective restoration is not the same as an ITR. And therefore, this amendment would actually change what Dr. Glassman's protocol identified. So what's the board's will?
Just a small comment. Other than the word interim, the remainder of that title is within the protocol of the pilot project. So.
I was just going to comment that I'm not sure that I agree with CDA's interpretation. I haven't seen a written interpretation of this section. To me, it looks like the initial promulgation of the regs is within the purview of the Hygiene Board. Subsequent amendments shall be agreed upon by the board and the Hygiene Board, but that looks like after the initial promulgation of the regulations. So again, I don't know if the Hygiene Board would prefer to have this board concur with their regulations and be willing to hold up the process. That I don't know. I was just suggesting that if you pull it back now, would this board potentially lose its opportunity to provide comment to the Hygiene Board? And maybe Mr. Lum can let us know what their timetable looks like and whether or not they'd be willing to wait for more formal either recommendations or more formal concerns being prepared and forwarded to that board.
Well, the unfortunate part is we're already behind on these regulations to begin with, so my board would like to promulgate them as quickly as possible, and it was brought to our attention to bring it to you all for agreement. And, we're in the thought that we don't need the dental board's approval on this, but I would prefer to get the agreement with you all to have this regulatory package move forward, because both entities are going to be working in conjunction with each other. So that's my viewpoint.
I guess I've been asked to withdraw my second, which I'm happy to do. I would just like to remind everybody that we have a pending regulatory package that has a lot of the same language that we'll be reviewing under Agenda Item 20A. And if we're going to make changes beyond what has been suggested to the hygiene's package, we're going to need to look at ours too.
Did you have Dr. Stewart?
I think I'm comfortable with what our executive officer has suggested, and I think at this point, because of this conversation, we should slow down and we should regroup and take a better look at the language. And we do have a close collaborative working relationship with the Hygiene Board, and I'd like to have that process move forward in that way.
I'm just not comfortable with where this has gone, and I'm not willing at this point to withdraw my motion. I don't want to table this and hold it up. I understand that we've not had a lot of time to look at this, but I think that it's possible to get to where we want to go if we can agree to get our concerns in, and then see what that looks like in a memo to the board. I don't want to table this. I don't want to hold up this process. Frankly, in my opinion, some of this is splitting hairs, and I don't want to do that. And I don't want to put the executive officer in a position of accepting something that his board may not have agreed with. Then we really have an issue. So I'm going to go back to suggesting that those of you who have expressed concerns, that you get those to the executive officer so that she can put those in writing to DHCC. I'm sorry.
I know it's a minor, it's not DHCC, it's DHBC. Dental.
Okay. Part of the splitting hairs today, but okay, I get it. And if you feel uncomfortable with the motion, then that's just a suggestion going forward that you can agree to or not. So what's your pleasure?
That's clarification of the motion. So the motion is to take no position and to put your concerns in writing that were discussed today to the board. I mean, to the executive officer to transmit to the dental hygiene board. Is that correct? And we need a second.
Question?
Sorry.
It's actually not a new motion.
So the
Can you repeat the whole motion? Please? So everybody knows
So the motion is to take no position and to refer to the EO concerns by dental board members on the amendments and to refer those concerns to the dental hygiene board.
Dr. Lottie? I saw your microphone on. Sorry. Okay. So there's been a motion and a second. I'm going to call for the question.
Okay. Burton.
Yes.
Burton, aye. Chan, aye. Chappelle Ingram, absent. Lai.
Yes.
Lai, yes. Laren. Laren, yes. Lay. Lay, yes. Mackenzie. Abstain. Medina.
No.
Medina, nay. Morrow. Morrow, yes. Olagi. Absent. Pacheco. Pacheco, yes. Stewart.
Yes.
Stewart, yes. Witcher. Witcher, yes. You. You, yes. Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before we have the rep report, can we take a little bio break? So, are we ready? The plan is to power through from here so that people who have 4, 5 o'clock flights can get them. So we'll just power on through and not do much. I did want to announce as to that the last issue that we looked at. I want to appoint a subcommittee to work with Karen on the information that will go back to Dental Hygiene Board. And I want to, if they will accept, appoint Tom Stewart and Hoon Lay. So we're going to now start with item 16A. And that is, for your reference, page 129. And so since you're not Daniel, then we will assume that you're Tina.
Yes. Tina Valerie, manager of the Dental Assisting Program, and I'm going to provide you the update on the portfolio pathway to licensure. At the February board meeting, it was reported that board staff were planning to offer informational workshops to first and second year dental students to give them the opportunity to become familiar with the portfolio pathway to licensure. Board staff prepared a portfolio presentation and presented it at Western University on March 21st and Loma Linda University on March 29th. Western University had 51 students in attendance, and about half of the students indicated that they planned to stay in California. Students were advised that if they were interested, that all were able to participate in the program. Loma Linda University had about 82 students in attendance, and 20 indicated that they planned to stay in California. Students were advised that they had to qualify for the portfolio program at Loma Linda, and that they were anticipating accepting 10 students in the next portfolio class. Board staff are also in the process of scheduling visits to the other dental schools at this time. We are also creating a brochure to give out at these workshops. It's an informational brochure about portfolio. And again, we plan on handing this out at future site visits to the dental schools just to give students more information about the program. And I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Any public comment? Thank you. The next item is 16B, the Western Regional Examination Board.
Okay, so it's been a great privilege for me to represent the Dental Board of California, just to be the liaison between Dental Board of California and the Western Regional Examination Board. So I've been serving on the DERB, the Dental Examination Review Board, for the last few years. I learned a lot, from the members of DERB. And I found that other state boards are basically faced with the same issues and concerns, that we have. This last year, REP changed the frequency of the Dental Examination Review Board meetings. We used to have 2 each year. Last year we only had 1, and this year they will have another one that's coming up in June. So at this point in time, I really don't have any report from the DERB committee. However, I'd like to recognize Dr. Norm Magnuson. He's past president of REP, and I asked him to give us a quick update of how the REP examination is going. As you know, many dental schools have gone through the REP exam for this year, and many of them will be applying, for our licensure. I think there are only a few more schools that are, that have their REP exam coming up. So he could give us a quick update of the examinations, how many have taken, and what the results are. So thank you for being here, Dr. Magazine.
Well, thank you for having me. Real quick, we've had about 75% of our exams have been completed. At this point, approximately 90% of the candidates have passed their first time around. You have to remember that we are an examination with multiple sections, and so if you pass 4 of the 5 sections, you still haven't passed the exam yet, so we are conjunctive in that way. We, at this point, about 93% of the candidates have passed their operative section on their first try. So that means 7% have either have to come back at a different site to do their operative section again. We haven't quite got the numbers for the endo and the prosthetic section yet, but it's probably pretty close to the same. So we probably have about 90% of the total candidates passing the first time around. On the operative section, one of the big things that people are concerned with are what we call critical errors. And critical errors include a candidate leaving decay. A couple times we actually had a candidate treat the wrong tooth or the wrong surface. I think that has something to do with being a little on the nervous side when they're taking these exams. But and they'll have to be one of those that have to come back at a future date. All the statistics this year are really close to last year's. As you well know, that I've shared with you before, the operative section we've changed from only if you get 3 or higher as a grade on your first restorative, you don't have to take a second procedure. But we had 221 students up to a couple weeks ago take 2 procedures because of the state that they're going to will either require 2 restorative procedures as in the class 2s or 1 class 3 and a class 2. And of those who passed on their first section of their restorative section didn't do as well on their second one. So 3 people failed the operative section after taking their second one, which is about 1%, which is well within the statistical norms of our exam. And of those 3 who did not pass after taking 2 procedures, 1 has come back and retaken it. So statistically, we're showing that one procedure, if they get a 3 or higher, is more than sufficient to tell a state board that they're minimally qualified to do operative section. So I'll try to keep this short and sweet so you can move on. I know you got a lot to do. Any questions? Okay, that was short and sweet. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And I know you inquired about our meeting dates. You did get those yesterday?
Oh, yeah, I stayed.
Okay.
Yeah, be here.
Okay. Thank you. Any public comment on Reb? Our next item is, remember that our next item has been pulled, and we will have AVEX at our next meeting. So then our next item is 17A, review of dental licensure and permit statistics.
Hi, Tina Valerie again with the manager of the Dental Assisting Program. I will be giving you the licensure and permit statistics. This memo is an overview of the dental licensure and permit statistics. It shows the number of licenses that are active, inactive, retired, disabled, canceled, and delinquent. It also shows the number of licenses in the process of being renewed. Staff have provided a breakdown of licenses issued by year and by pathway to licensure, along with an overview of the different permits that have been issued and the number of active licenses by county to help identify the shortage areas. Additionally, staff has included a monthly breakdown of applications received, approved, canceled, withdrawn, and denied, along with the number of licenses that have been issued. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
I did have a question about the delinquent licenses. Are you finding that you are able to adjudicate those quicker through Breeze, or not?
I guess definitely through Breeze, it's faster. It eliminates the cashiering process in-house, so people are able to renew online and it instantly updates, as opposed to in-house, it has to go through a process. So it is faster for people who need it to be faster.
We don't have a lot of issue with people whose license are delinquent who may be still practicing.
I'm not sure that I would have that information. We would again be notified by the complaint process if that's happening. So that would go through our enforcement unit.
Okay. Any questions? Any public comment?
Okay, sorry. Okay, so Tina Valerie again. I'm going to be covering 17B, which is the general anesthesia and conscious sedation permit evaluation statistics. This memo also provides an overview of the on-site inspections and evaluations administered by the board from April 2018 through May of 2019. Additionally, it mentions that we are actively recruiting for the evaluation program since there is a great need for conscious sedation evaluators throughout California, and that due to the lack of available evaluators, there have been several evaluations that have had to be postponed recently. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them with Dr. Witcher's help.
Questions? Public comment?
I have a question. Okay. So, Dr. Witcher, there are some renewal processes where there is just done by questionnaire, or how is the examination, like re-examination of a conscious sedation permit, or I don't understand the different levels and what is done by practical and one is done by. Because it came up yesterday, I didn't kind of understand that.
Let me briefly go through that if I can. I'll try to move it along. Basically, we have 4, maybe 5 permit categories for administration of sedation. You have the general anesthesia permit, which requires completion of 1 year of a residency training program in general anesthesia. You have the conscious sedation permit for routes other than oral, and that requires completion of 60 hours of training in 20 cases. And then you have the oral conscious sedation permits, pediatric and adult, which require completion of 24 hours of training and 1 case. Now, only 2 permit categories require evaluation. Oh, I should just mention that if you give less than a maximum FDA recommended dose of a sedative for home use, you don't need a permit at all. So if you want to give a patient a pre-op Valium so they're not so nervous in the chair, you do not need an oral conscious sedation permit for that unless you give a big dose. So the office anesthesia inspection and evaluation is a program that's been in existence since about 1976. Both conscious sedation and general anesthesia permit holders have to undergo an office evaluation either once every 5 years or once every 6 years, and that involves a team of 2 people that go to the office, review the facilities, drugs, and emergencies equipment, review the facility, watch them do a case, and then run them through a series of 13 simulated emergencies that have to be demonstrated as if they were actually going through an emergency. And if they fail that, they can reapply and be examined again within 30 days. If they fail twice, then it comes to your committee for adjudication. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Thank you.
I wanted to add at this point that we have 2 calibration sessions scheduled. One that's going to be occurring in Oakland, I believe, on Wednesday, the 22nd. And the next one in Southern California the following week on the 29th. And Dr. Witcher has been working with Jessica Olney in our office to put together the material for this calibration course. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Dr. Witcher?
Well, just that we had a really good response. We have had an online video that goes through the process. This lecture is based on that material. We've got representatives from both conscious sedation and general anesthesia provider groups who will be giving the lecture. We haven't given it as a live course in a few years, and so, but we had a really good response. In fact, the courses are full, so it means there's some pent-up demand there, and we're under pressure to do a really good job.
Questions? Any public comment? Thank you. Okay, our next item is 18A, and it's a presentation by Cal at Amos on the 2019 opioid education project. And this is going to be a video, so those of us in the front will have to shift around.
Okay. High tech. Good morning. My name is Alan Kay. I'm an oral and maxillofacial surgeon. And I'm here this morning. First of all, I want to thank Karen Fisher and Fran Burton for this opportunity, and of course the rest of the board. And I'm here this morning to give you a look at a project that we began several months ago when the federal government decided that dentists, especially oral surgeons, were responsible in some way for getting children hooked on opioids. Dr. Ferguson of the American Association of Oral Surgeons reported to us at a meeting that he had gotten a letter, and that letter basically put us on the dartboard, so to speak. And he thought it was outrageous to some extent, and I agreed to some extent. But anyway, we have to live with it. And when I was the president of Cal Amos, I thought perhaps we need to be proactive and be proactive very quickly. And with the help of the board and and our support staff of California Association, we put together this project, which I have gone around the state and given to local high schools and worked with the Beverly Hills Fire Department, Police Department, their Health and Safety Commission. And we're thankful that we can give you this opportunity to look at what we've produced and to show you how we're trying to stem the tide. I kind of kid around when I say that they finally came after the doctors because doctors don't shoot back. And so here we are, and it's not a video, it's a PowerPoint. So what I'd like to do is to give the presentation to you like the same way that I would give it in front of a classroom. And I will deviate every now and then to give you some idea of what I say to them that's a little off the slide per se, but to bring it home, and it's being very well received. And I want you to also know that when this opioid issue came out, I never realized how extensive it really was. I thought we're talking about climate change, is it real, isn't it real, and all the other issues that are going up with environment. You have both sides of the issue. Till I got involved in this, when I finally realized that this is really out of control. This is so big, even I was surprised. So with that to say, if you don't mind, I'd like to stand and be able to do the presentation like I would in front of a classroom. Does it come off? Just hold it. Well, I can speak real loud. Oh, I do? Oh, I do. Okay. All right. This is a first. Okay. All right. So, of course, I introduced myself to the classroom, And we begin by saying the first slide, which says, you can read it, because numbers are important. We teach you math. Because literature is important. We teach you reading. Because science is important. We teach you biology and chemistry. But most important, because you are important, we teach you to avoid opioids. Why am I giving this talk to you? It's quite simple. I'm an oral and maxillofacial surgeon. I'm a trained dentist, a specialist in the surgery of the mouth and the jaws. And we use post-surgical pain management. And we want you to understand the risks, misuse, and abuse of opioids. What are opioids? Okay. Medications that relieve pain, derived from the opium, synthesized in laboratories, legal or illegal. They work by binding to the brain's opioid receptors. They block pain in the brain, at the site of, in the brain, not at the site of injury. And that is the big paradigm shift. It's at the site of injury that the non-steroidals work, opioids work on the brain. They create a sense of euphoria. They take a period of, over a period of time, of course, you require larger doses, and it's extremely habit-forming and ultimately addictive. Opioid heroin, it's an epidemic, and in the true sense of the word, it is an epidemic. I can tell you that when I was giving this talk in one classroom, a young student stood up and she said, "May I address the class?" right in the middle of my presentation. And I said, "Sure, certainly, go right ahead. I want the class to know that my father is a heroin addict, he's destroyed our family, and my brother and him are killing each other." She thanked me and she sat down. While I was giving a talk, I work with a lady by the name, when I can work with her, her name is Jody Barber. She's one of the moms that lost a child to this. She's been out there proactively, she has videos, and she was actually with us in Newport Beach when we gave this presentation to the oral surgeons. And she spoke for a few minutes. And she was standing on the sideline. She would get up there and she would tell the class what happened with her son and how she found him. And she begged the class, "Don't do this to your mother, because you just don't want to do this to your parents." Of course, the room, everybody, I mean, I heard her say this 3 times in a row in 3 classes, and you get choked up every time you listen to her. She's very powerful. Anyway, that being said, while I was giving my talk, her phone went off, and she took a gasp, and I looked at her and I said, "What's wrong?" And this is what the phone said. It was a text message. "Jody, I want to thank you for all of the help that you gave me. You tried so hard to help me. I cannot shake this thing. I can't get rid of it. I'm doing the best I can. I've decided to kill myself, commit suicide this afternoon, and I want to say goodbye." I mean, this is right in the middle of me giving this to a classroom. So this is real stuff. Deadliest drug crisis in all of American history. There were 49,000 deaths due to opioids in 2017. More than car crashes, guns, suicide, or homicides. 134 Americans died each year in 2017 from the overdose, prescription opioids, heroin, and fentanyl. That's 1 death every 11 minutes, and then I look to the classroom and I say, I want everybody to look at your watch. You figure out how much time I'm talking to you, and then you calculate and tell me how many people died. It is nationwide. There's been a 300% increase in heroin-related overdose deaths in the United States since 2000. It's in California, and it's in your community. 2012, Californians died in 2016. Opioid-related deaths in California are increasing. 1,000 deaths per year in 2000, 2012 in 2016, 1,172 due to prescription opioids, and 840 due to heroin and fentanyl. In addition to reducing pain, this is what opioids do to you: drowsiness and sedation, mental confusion, nausea and vomiting, constipation, pinpoint pupils, slowed pulse, depression, overdose, and death. Common prescription opioids: Narco, oxycodone, Percocet, morphine, Duromorph, all these names. And you know, it's interesting. I try to explain to the students, you know how these names come about? They do it with focus groups. They get groups together, the drug companies do it, and they give them a list of a bunch of names, and they tell them what the drug does, and they say, which name gives you the sense of what we're trying to sell for this drug? And that's how they come up with these names. It's very interesting how they do that. So these just don't come out of fresh air. They spend a lot of money figuring out. I kind of get a kick out of Opana because years ago, for those of you who are old enough, you remember Ipana toothpaste. And when I saw the Opana, I said, I don't know. Okay, now, prescription opioids. Many teens believe that prescription drugs are safer because it's written by a doctor. Not so. 36% of high school seniors reported in 2017 that prescription painkillers were easy to get. In fact, there are students that go to other students when they find out they might be going to get their wisdom teeth out, and they say, hey, if the doc gives you a prescription for them, sell it to me, or give it to me, because I can get the pills and then I can sell it in the street. We have seniors getting 50, 60 pain medication pills at a time who are actually also dealing and selling these pills on the market to make a little extra money. Signs of abuse: drowsiness, poor coordination, itching, pupil size, intoxicated it's small, withdrawal they're large, confusion and nausea, vomiting, shaking, sweating, passing out. And then I ask the kids, I say, is this the way you want to feel? Because if you want to feel like that, just take these medications. Signs of opioid misuse and abuse, behavioral signs. And I tell the kids, it's up to you, because you all know that you know somebody that you're going to recognize when I show you this slide. We had one young lady, when she found out that these things can be anonymous and her name wouldn't be involved, she went to the teacher after my talk and she gave the teacher a name of a fellow that's been selling drugs on campus for 2 years, and she hasn't said a word about it because she was afraid. Once she found out that it was anonymous, she gave the name of this individual to the teacher. And I haven't been doing this very long. I just give you an idea how intense this is. Mood swings, hostility, changes in friends, attitudes, activities, poor decision-making, poor attendance, poor grades, increased isolation and secrecy, wearing long-sleeve shirts to hide your needle marks, high, giddy, euphoric, stealing, selling medications. We tell them, you've got to do something about trying to help them. What happens when the pills run out? Well, then they start looking for alternatives. Turns out that heroin and fentanyl are cheaper on the street than actually getting these prescription drugs, so that's where they turn. It's become the drug of choice, and it's illegal opioid used with medical supervision to get high, without medical supervision to get high. What is heroin? Diacetyl morphine comes from the opium poppy flower. It can look like white or brown powder or black tar. Other names: H, horse, smack, junk, brown sugar. That's when I say to the kids, listen, how many of you in the room have a pet? Well, 3/4 of them raise their hand. I said, do you give a special name to your pet? Do you call it Snooky? Do you call it Cutie? Do you call it Puffy? Do you know why you give those names to your pets? It's very simple. Because you feel very close to those pets. They love you and you love them. It's a very tight bond. And that's why you look for special names. Well, take a look at what heroin is. Brown sugar. Why would you call poison brown sugar? Because that brown sugar has the same control of your life that your pet does. You feel close to your pet. Your pet and you are one. You have bonded. And that's why these words and these names come up. That's what they're doing there, to show you how tightly you become connected to that drug. They give it special names. There's no quality control, of course, if it's illegal. So, how does it make you feel? instant rush of good feelings and happiness, disoriented, sleepy, unable to focus. How is it used? Well, injected, which is the fastest way, snorted, and smoked. But no matter how you take it, changes your brain very quickly. Heroin is extremely addictive. You quickly build a tolerance, which means you need more and more. You begin to need just to feel normal, you have to start taking the drug. And of course, when you stop taking it, you become very sick, which they call withdrawal. Heroin facts. It's stronger, cheaper, and easier to get than prescription pills. I already told you that. It's more dangerous than prescription pills. You never know what's in it, what they cut, or what they mix it with, and possibly they mix it with fentanyl. Heroin overdoses often leads to death. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid. It's especially dangerous when added to heroin. It's 30 to 50 times more deadly than heroin. The equivalent amount to just a few grains of table salt can be lethal. Risk of heroin abuse: slows vital signs, loss of consciousness, nausea, collapsed veins. You notice we go through this several times. This is like the third slide where we go through this again. Infections, high risk of contracting HIV and AIDS, lung disease, miscarriage, and of course, overdose and death. Now we get to the good part. The one thing we have to impress upon these children is very simple. It's not their fault. It's the fault of the maturity of the brain. That's the key. If you want to get them to listen to you, that you're not the doctor, the professor giving them something they need and they have to listen to you, just the opposite. If you take away the penalty, and I try to explain to them, there's a reason why there's juvenile court and there's adult court, because even the justice system takes into account the fact that the juvenile brain is not mature enough sometimes, and that's how they get into trouble with the law, because they're not thinking. They're really out for the excitement of the moment. So why are we talking to you about this? The development and maturity continues well into your 20s. So brain development in teens, areas of the brain to develop in the early teen years involve risk-taking, sensation-seeking, adrenaline rush. Now, the reason why we talk about this is it's very simple. If you take a drug like Ritalin, now many of you might have heard of Ritalin, if you give Ritalin to a child who's hyperactive, you will calm them down. You give the same drug to an adult, it acts like an amphetamine. The reason being is it's chemistry. It's all chemistry. A young brain doesn't react to that drug like an adult brain because there is, in fact, a difference. Therefore, areas of the brain to develop in later years involve regulation of emotions, impulse control, consider the consequences. And then I look at the kids and I say, how many of you have heard of the term puppy love? Well, 3/4 of the room raised their hand. I said, do you know what puppy love is? I want you to think about this. You have a boyfriend in high school, you're going out, all the people on campus know that you're going out together, and then something happens and you break up. Well, you go home and you start sulking in your house. You refuse to go to school. You stop eating. Your mother is screaming and yelling at you. You've got to go to school. What are you doing? I can't go to school. I can't face anybody. And you go through this whole scenario of puppy love. 35 years later, you're at the reunion of your high school, and a friend of yours says, Carol, do you remember the time when you broke up with Steve and you wouldn't leave your house and you stopped eating and you wouldn't go to school and you thought the world was coming to an end? Do you remember that? And Carol says, yeah, what was I thinking? That guy was such a nerd. And that's the difference. That's why the teenage brain is different than the adult brain. Because now the adult brain, Carol is now saying to herself, hey, wait a minute. I can control my impulses. I understand my emotions. I understand the consequences. I can make better judgments in decision making. That's why I tell them, if somebody's at a party and wants to give you a pill, a teenager will go, oh, okay, I'll try it. Oh, try it. It's great. Okay, because they don't think of consequences. If you take a drink and you don't drink anything you don't open, and if you're at a bar with a drink, if you leave that drink, you go to the restroom, don't go back to the drink unless you take the drink with you. And these are the things you have to tell the kids, and they begin to listen to you as soon as you take away that the authoritarian speech that you throw at them. When you begin to explain to them it's not their fault. So brain development in teens, what does this mean? Based on recent scientific evidence, the teen brain makes you more susceptible to the opioid than an adult. And it's not your fault that you're more susceptible. It's all chemistry. It is important to reduce the exposure to opioids. What can we do as doctors? Okay, here's what we can do. We're not saying we weren't part of the problem, but we're going to help the problem. Limit prescription opioids to patients who clearly need them. I can tell you in my office, if I write one prescription for opioids a month, it's a lot. Non-steroidals like Advil, Motrin, and Aleve, they're fantastic drugs. They work. They are the best. They just are. I mean, if I ask you to believe anything, believe that one thing, that non-steroidals are one of the most fantastic drugs ever produced because they work at the area of inflammation, and that's where the pain begins. Treat the spot that's causing the pain. There's no sense going to the brain to treat the brain. Prescribe, as a doctor, prescribe only the quantity of pills that are needed. Most patients who need an opioid, 2 days is more than enough. Use the strong non-steroidal painkillers. They work, they're fantastic, but they don't work in the brain, and that's the key. With or without Tylenol, they give effective relief, moderate pain, actually I would say more than moderate pain, with no addictive potential. So, do you think vaping and marijuana, alcohol can lead to other drugs? Well, 9 out of 10 people who meet the medical criteria for addiction started smoking, drinking, or using other drugs before they turned 18. Think about that with our new laws on marijuana. 75% of young people who use heroin say they misused or abused prescription drugs. And by the way, I've had parents who have tried to manipulate me to get the drugs for themselves. And it's unbelievable what people will go through to get their hands on this stuff. Number of high school students reporting heroin and fentanyl use doubled in the past 10 years. No one ever thinks it will happen to them. No one ever believes it. And then I look at the class and I say, but it can happen to you. So what can you do? Don't take medications that were not prescribed. Prince died from taking pills he thought was Vicodin. They were actually fentanyl. Demi Lovato overdosed on what she thought was oxycodone. It was laced with fentanyl. Jimi Hendrix died from an overdose with vomiting. If you see someone you think may have taken an overdose, you call 911. California 911 Good Samaritan law protects you and can save a life. If you or a friend or a bunch of you are taking drugs and one of your friends looks like they're in big trouble and going to die, if you call the authorities immediately, get help for the individual, even though you have been involved in the drug taking, you will not be prosecuted because you are acting to save a life. So even if you're involved, you must say something. The following are signs of overdose: unconsciousness, passed out, not breathing, lips are blue or grayish in color. Why should you care about the 9/11 law? The law empowers you to save a person's life. The law encourages anyone to call 911 if you experience or see an overdose. Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration. This is a national helpline. I ask the kids to take out their little cell phones, take a picture of this, or write down the number. Also, teachers will ask them to do that also. For those with a possible opioid disorder, the helpline is free and confidential, 365, 24 hours a day. Information, English and Spanish. For individuals and family members facing mental and substance abuse disorders, provides referrals to local treatment facilities and groups. So, you're in control of your destination. If you go to the left, if you go the wrong way, drug addiction, life of misery, overdose, and death. If you take the right road, full life, dreams fulfilled, family and friends, don't take opioids. Thank you for your attention. So this is what we're doing, and we plan on going. Oral surgeons across the state will be getting this presentation on a thumb drive. They will be going to their local high schools with support letters from us and other facilities, other schools, other departments, police departments, fire departments. And we presented this to, I believe, 14 legislators a few weeks ago. And each legislator saw this, or most of it. And they were very, very, very impressed. They were supportive of our California Association of Oral Surgeons. It was well received in Sacramento. I think we're onto something. I think if this project continues the way I'd like to see it go, with 600-700 oral surgeons in the state, we can canvass every high school in the state, and then hopefully it'll go through American Association of Oral Surgeons Chicago, and this will go nationally. Cal Amos has a history of outreach. You heard Dr. Witcher talk about our, back in '76, I believe, we began the in-office evaluations for anesthesia. We've been involved with CCF, California Care Force. This is another project. So we have a history of this, and I hope you will all see this and reflect nicely about the presentation. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer it.
Stewart.
Dr. Cade, tell me, what is the appropriate age that you think would be most effective in getting into the schools? Is it high school? Is it younger?
Good question, because that comes up often. I actually believe younger too. I think not only do we need to get into the grade schools, but PTA. The PTA is critical because you start talking to parents. So between the PTA, grade school, and high school, they will see this in repetition. That's the key. The key is, every year, if you work it out right, every year they can see this presentation if the school mandates it. And we are working on other ways of getting the association of, I forget the name of it, where they have all the schools meet once a year, all of the people that handle California's school system. They meet once a year, and we can get this into the curriculum. I think that's very helpful. But what I really like about this is this is doctor to student. There's no in between. This is very pure in its presentation. They are going to hear it from the horse's mouth. They're going to hear it from the people who write the prescriptions, and they're going to understand that we recognize what's going on, and we've got to turn the tide. Because, again, I was blown away by how much and how many people are involved in, when I say involved with drugs. I never would have believed it until I started going to these classrooms, and I'm a believer now. When I ask how many know somebody, I always ask the classes, how many in this classroom know someone or a close family member who has this problem? I promise you, 3/4 of the hands go up. It's unbelievable.
One more question. How widely are you able to disseminate this thumb drive if we in various counties around California wanted to have access to it and present to schools? Would the association be open to that?
Well, I'm not involved with making the policy right now, but I will tell you that oral surgeons have been earmarked to do this through the California Association of Oral Surgeons. But we also recognize that at probably some point, we will certainly not only anticipate, but be willing to get into discussion on something of what you just mentioned. Because what we want to do now is get this project off the ground and moving. We have many of these thumb drives that have already been made up. We have doctors calling all the time up in Sacramento, to our organization, asking for the thumb drive. We have a video of me presenting this so that the doc, kind of like the calibration test, that the calibration course that you give for the anesthesia. So they can see kind of what I do. They don't have to copy exactly what I do, but it gives them a little thumbnail sketch of how I do it so they can get out there and give this presentation. And we have a lot of interest right now from the oral surgeons. And again, you know, oral surgeons, we're kind of the most docs that meet these youngsters because of wisdom teeth. So we have the opportunity to again, one-on-one, I mean, talk to the, I hate to say it, but look it's like looking in the horse's mouth. I mean, you're talking to the people that directly involve themselves with this type of thing. And when there's questions that are asked, we can very easily answer them because we have the background.
Meredith, were you going to ask a question? Okay.
Okay.
Abigail.
Yes, okay. I think this is a very good presentation. And I have the same need as Dr. Stewart. If we can get a copy of this and use it for presentation. And I love to use this for the Chinese community. And then personally, I'm also the Northern California Chinese Media Association president. So I have access to all kind of media like TV and radio. And I think it's a great resources to present to the population.
Thank you.
All right, great. So my comment, I'm a school board member, so in San Bernardino, there is the California School Boards Association. I'm not sure if that's something that you're willing to present. There's a conference coming up.
Yes.
And this would be a great way to connect with all the school districts in the state of California, and that way we're able to get that information out there. I'm also would like to find out how we could bring this back to our own school district. We're the ninth largest district in the state of California, so that could be a starting point as well.
Yeah.
And the other piece would be regarding, I'm kind of confused. Why is it allowed if it's affecting directly in the brain? Is there some reason why opioids is still existing and why doctors are still prescribing it?
Well, there is certainly a need for opioids. There's no doubt about it. The problem is we were using the fly swatter technique. We just, I mean, when I went through my training, the way it was worked out that everybody got a prescription for, say, Tylenol and codeine after they had extractions or wisdom teeth or whatever the case might be. It was, you know what it's like? The best way I could describe it to you is, you know as well as I do that people with certain heart conditions or rheumatic fever, whatever it was, the American Heart Association said that they needed to be pre-medicated with antibiotics. And for 20, 30 years, we religiously gave these patients antibiotics. Then all of a sudden, the American Heart Association just reverses itself and says, you know what? It's really not necessary. And you kind of scratch your head and go, I mean, we're talking about 30 years of giving all of these patients antibiotics. And they reverse themselves. And patients who are used to it would say to me, where's my antibiotic? I said, well, you know what? You don't really need it. And they go, what? You mean all these times I took those pills? I mean, this happens all the time. And I said, yeah. I said, that's what they did. So, yes, we do get into these patterns that sometimes don't make any sense. And have we learned the hard way? I think we have. Has it altered the prescribing techniques of doctors, all doctors across the country? I think it has. But you can't ignore the fact that there are individuals with horrible diseases and horrible pain, and I mean, it's just a fact of life where you have to treat them centrally. You just have to do it. I mean, otherwise you can't just let them suffer for the rest of their life. You're trying to help them. But in what we do, they're far and in between. But when they need it, we will write a prescription for it when they need it.
Is there a limitation on?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. You give them 2 days supply, basically. And if necessary, you can give them a renewal for another couple of days. But if there's anything beyond that, you need to see the patient and figure out why they're in so much pain. Because in theory, most of the cases that most vast 80 to 90% of them The patients are fine within 2 to 3 days. It's amazing, but it's true.
And I know that it was part of your presentation was the marijuana slide. If there's a way that we can slide to that, because I would like to get the research on that one. I think in the bottom you had information on the bottom of the slide.
Yeah, it all comes from this. I can get it for you.
Yeah,
but
perfect.
It's
Thank
all
you.
from the the CDC.
All right, perfect. Thank you. That's it.
That's it. Oh,
Jaco, thank you for your presentation. Mine is more of a logistical question. Can this be posted on the website, on the oral surgeon's website?
I believe it is on the oral. Is it on the oral?
Instead of doing thumb drives? So you don't need a thumb drive to access this presentation then?
No, but I think you need to be part of CalAMUS to see it, I think. I'm not sure. But remember, you're getting a real preview here. This is in its beginning moments. It's the infancy here. So from that perspective, I mean, things are evolving all the time.
Right.
So as far as that's concerned, I can certainly bring what you just asked me about to the executive director, Pam Congdon of CalAMUS, and the board, and I'm sure they'll get back with an answer for you.
Right, thank you.
Thank you.
Just want to make another quick comment. As a licensed acupuncturist, I realized that when I use acupuncture, it's a great tool to control pain.
Yes.
With very little side effect or no side effect. So this is a great alternative for patients.
No, in fact, interestingly enough, back in the early 70s, I was trained by a Dr. Shibatani in New York in acupuncture. And yes, I agree with you. Acupuncture does work. So I'm not against that either. There are a lot of modalities. We start our patients off with the nonsteroidals about 15 to 20 minutes before we begin the procedure. And we continue them for a while.
And it's also a great tool to help people to overcome their withdrawal syndrome by using acupuncture.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much.
I want to thank you. It has not been that many years ago that the board was invited to San Francisco for a presentation by the San Francisco regional office, district attorneys, and a number of groups, and it was to talk about opioids and to talk about the fact that the worst epidemic in California is in Marin County. And so there were people across the disciplines, including dental professionals. And to a person, the attitude was, why are we here? We're not the source of the problem. And so it's good to see that we've come full circle and we realize that any prescriber is a part of the problem. So I really appreciate your presentation. Very, very well done, and kudos to CalAMUS.
Thank you very much.
This takes us to 18B.
I wasn't sure if there was public comments. I believe someone was trying to sit to see if there was public comments.
I'm sorry?
I wasn't sure if there was public comments because I did see if there was a movement that they were going to speak. I wasn't sure.
I'm sorry, I cannot hear you.
Okay, never mind. Disregard. Because I thought of a young lady was going to move forward to make some public comments, but I must have been confused. No worries.
Okay, Carlos.
Good afternoon, Carlos Alvarez, Enforcement Chief, and I'm here to give a presentation on agenda item 18B, the diversion program. So currently right now the diversion program statistics is for the quarter ending of March 31st of 2019. And currently, we have 16 active participants in the program. In February, we had 2 probation referrals. In March, we had 1. And so then in February, we had a case that was closed. And so it still brought it, we were even still at 16. So currently right now, the board is recruiting for a public member position in the northern deck, and 2 dental positions on the southern deck, a physician psychologist position on both the northern and southern deck, and a dental auxiliary position on both northern and southern deck. And so the next deck meeting was actually held yesterday in Sacramento, in which licensing manager Bernal Vava attended that meeting.
Questions? Public comment? Thank you.
And I will move into agenda item 18C, which is an update regarding the February 26th and April 23rd, 2019 statewide opiate safety work group meetings. So I attended the statewide opiate safety work group meeting on February 26th, and the following 9 SOS work group opiate strategies have been finalized, and it was discussed. So the first one was to strengthen statewide collaboration, promote safe prescribing, and that's California's working to reduce unsafe long-term and high-dose prescribing practices, building community capacity, expanding medication-assisted treatment programs, increase the access to naloxone, which is the same as Narcan, reducing access to and negative consequences to unsolicited drugs, and addressing priority population high-risk settings. And so what that is to increase the care and services for high-risk populations, which include pregnant women, veterans, older adults, youths, and incarcerated individuals, and tribal communities. And I will address this further in my presentation regarding these high-risk populations. Also, number 8 was to promote public education and awareness. So it's educating Californians about the risk of using opiates and promoting safe and responsible use. And I thought it was great with the last presentation that was presented that actually covers this. Number 9 was to translate data into actionable information. So also the maternal the Maternal Neonatal Task Force attended the meeting and presented their task force objectives and core principles. And now just to give a little background on that, the Center for Disease and Control and Prevention actually did a study with 28 states. And what it was discovered with this study, it was from 1999 to 2014. So 1.5 cases per 1,000 visits of delivery hospitalizations, pregnant women had an opiate use disorder. So that was 1.5 cases per every 1,000 delivery hospitalizations. And actually California was the lowest of the 28 states, where it was 0.05 cases for pregnant women having the opiate disorder. So the Maternal Neonatal Task Force asked the SOS work group meeting to adopt their core principles. And so their objectives was to endorse core principles of evidence-based care of prenatal women with substance abuse disorder and their infants, advise and make recommendations for statewide efforts to improve substance use disorder, maternal, neonatal, and infant care, explore policy and payment opportunities to support workforce development and improve care for prenatal women and their infants. So their core principles was prevention. So all prescribers caring for women of reproductive age practice opiate stewardships to prevent opiate dependency and addiction. And treatment, all prenatal women have access to screening, treatment, and recovery services without barriers, including medications and addictions to treatment, aligned with the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists opiate bundle, and I mispronounced that, and I apologize. All substance-exposed newborns are treated with evidence-based care that prioritizes mother-baby bonding with considering medical interventions and supports all health, social services, county welfare, mental behavioral health, and criminal justice interventions impacting women with substance abuse disorders and their infants to promote the mother-baby dyad and bonding, trauma-informed approaches, family resilience, recovery, and evidence-based care. And also during that presentation, the California Correctional Health Services Department of Corrections presented on the opiate stewardship program in prison. So from 2017 through 2018, there was an increase of reported drug overdoses cases in the correctional facilities. And there was 588 emergency department encounters, 155 were hospitalizations, and 37 deaths, all related to drug overdoses. In 2018, there was 730 emergency encounters, 155 hospitalizations, and 42 deaths, all relations to overdoses. And again, this is inside the correctional facilities. And between 2013 and 2016, there was an overdose death rate within the initial 14 transitional days back into the community, which was 43.6%. And from 366 to 720 the transition days, the overdose rate was 8.2. So it kind of curved down as this person was back into the population. So with this is what created the opiate stewardship program in the correctional facility. And so they focus on optimizing plan management, which was a 3-part evidence-based guideline, which was assessment, non-opiate therapy, risk access, and opiate agreement. And what that opiate agreement is that the individual was signed saying that they would take a limited amount of prescriptions. The agreement was not to share their prescriptions, and also the agreement was not to use any machinery. The agreement was also to conduct urine testing monitoring, and also part of the stewardship program was to use the CURES system. So also was to create access to naloxone or Narcan. So the Emergency Medical Response Program, naloxone initiative for 2018 prescription increased. In January 18, there were 69 prescriptions for naloxone. And again, we're talking about within the correctional facility. And by the end of December 2018, approximately there was 741 prescriptions that were prescribed for naloxone. And also they emphasize on increasing access to medicine-assisted treatment. And so now with any individuals that was coming into the correctional facility, what they're doing is they're having screenings now. So they're screening all the individuals coming into the facility. And so they're screening them to see if they're moderate or high risk to opiates. And so what they do is they assign them to the appropriate level of care. And also what they do is they determine for medication-assisted treatment, and they assign them to the appropriate institution based on their care needs. And also to assist on this stewardship program to reduce the overdoses, the healthcare transition teams partnered with parole, probation, county liaisons, and others to successfully reintegrate the individuals back into the community. And that was to help them assist in enrolling and activate in Medi-Cal, securing housing for them, arranging transport and schedule healthcare appointments, and engage in family and peer support. And also a transitional guidance on finances, employment, and education. So they looked into this in order to reduce the overdoses that was occurring within the facility and also when they were being released from the correctional facility. So on April 23rd of 2019, Investigative Analysis Unit Manager Alexander Bordenitis attended the statewide opiate safety work group meeting. And so with that meeting, it was discussed drug safety communication risk with sudden discontinuation of opiates. So on April 9th of 2019, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration issued a warning that it has received reports of serious harm in patients who are physically dependent on opiates pain medications when these medications are suddenly discontinued or the dose is rapidly decreased. So examples of serious harm includes serious withdrawal symptoms, uncontrolled pain, psychological distress, and suicide. So the FDA is requiring to expand guidance with prescribing information on opiates intended for the outpatient settings and how to safely decrease the doses in the patients. So currently, right now, for the Centers for Disease and Control Prevention, they actually put a pocket guide on how to taper down the opiates for chronic pain in order to assist the physicians. So that's all available on their website. So the other items that were discussed was opiate efforts with the American Indian and Alaska Native population. So what they saw, there was a lot, they did statistics from 2008 to 2018, and those statistics were per 1,000 average of the population. So with the American Indian and Alaska Native population, deaths for all opiates in California were 13, and all deaths from prescription opiates in California for the American Indian and Alaska Native population was 8. So what they did with this was created the California Tribal Medication Assisted Treatment Expansion Project. So in 2015, the Department of Health Care Services began conversations with the tribal communities regarding the gaps in the treatment available to for substance use disorder services. The tribal partners, tribal health clinics, and the state began to design a culturally responsive system dedicated to 11 million of federal opiate state targeted response and state opiate response grant dollars. And so what this created was the Tribal MAT project, and also it created the TeleMAT. So there's a contractor right now providing MAT telehealth services to patients with opiate use disorders and co-occurring disorders in 12 Indian health programs statewide. Also provide on-site scheduling of patient visits, Indian health provider needs assessment, technical assistance around naloxone and American Society of Addiction medicine criteria, as well as several other efforts to enhance MAT in the Indian health provider settings. It also includes on-site technical assistance and protocols for tribal clinics, adding MAT services. Also, the delivery of 6 educational webinars to date for participating programs. There's also a TeleWell website, which is www.telewell.org. And so currently you go in there, look at their website. There's materials available on all these telemats and the assisted treatment programs. That's all available on their website. And also what it created was a suicide prevention. So the suicide prevention, and there's an intensive care management for Native youth ages from 10 to 24. There's also prevention services to the parents or guardians of youth. Also prevention and intensive care management programs utilizing a family-focused wraparound model and the Native American mental theory of change framework for youth and their families. Community activity engagement for youth and their families. Developing a curriculum around suicide prevention and its relations to opiate disorders. And all these services began in November of 2018. And so therefore, the next meeting is scheduled for June 25th of 2019. So if there's any questions I could address.
Any questions? Members, this statewide opioid safety workshop was something that was born out of that meeting initially in San Francisco. And so we've come forward a lot. That meeting, that group, is a contingent of representatives from various state agencies, and they're pulling more and more people into that group. So No questions? Any public comment? Thank you. Next item is (19A), and that is the tentative legislative calendar, the 2019 legislative calendar. I wanted to just point out to you some deadlines. Tomorrow, Friday, is the last day for fiscal committees to hear and report bills to the floor that were introduced in their house. And so, therefore, of immediate concern to us is AB 1519, which would have to move out of committee into the floor. The next deadline is May 31st, and that is the date for bills to be passed out of their original house of origin. Something we should know. That takes us to 19B, discussion and possible action on legislation.
Good afternoon. Wilbert Rumbawa, Administrative Services Manager with the Dental Board. The Dental Board has been tracking several bills relating to professions and vocations within the Department of Consumer Affairs. As a healing arts program under the department, I will be providing a brief summary of 6 bills identified here. There will be memorandums that will include the information regarding each bill's status, location, date of introduction, date of last amendment, and I will be providing the summary. In addition, there's also 5 bills that affect the department, but they don't provide a direct impact to the board, so we kept them on here as the 5 for informational purposes only. If you all turn to page 160, AB 193, it requires the department to conduct a comprehensive review to facilitate licensure portability. As staff had been reviewing the bill, we believe it has a minor and observable impact to the board. It will only require a breeze modification to determine active duty service members, veterans, and spouses for waived renewal fees.
Good afternoon, Sarah Wallace, Assistant Executive Officer. Also wanted to add that AB 193 seems to have been held in Policy Committee, and since that deadline has passed, I believe that this bill is no longer moving forward. So we would recommend just continuing watching this bill at this time.
Assembly Bill 544. Assembly Bill 544 limits the maximum renewal fees for an inactive status license to 1/2. What this would mean for the dental board and the dental assisting program is it could potentially reduce the dental board's revenue by $135,000, and for the RDA program, it could potentially reduce revenues by $214,000. We're constantly monitoring the board's and the RDA program's budget, and at this time, as we're presenting, there is no need for a fee increase, but we will be monitoring it throughout the session and ensure that it doesn't affect the programs.
Additionally, this bill was held in Assembly Appropriations in the suspense file, and it's up for hearing today in Assembly Appropriations, so we recommend at this point continuing to watch this bill.
Assembly Bill 613 would allow the Department of Consumer Affairs and the Dental Board of California to increase fees based on the California Consumer Price Index, the CPI. The board staff recommend a support if amended. What this would do is it would give us additional authority to increase fees based on the CPI. For instance, April 2014 to April 2018, the CPI increase was 10%, so it would allow the board to increase fees by 10%, in addition to regulations. So at this point, it's another mechanism that the board can increase fees along with regulations, so we would recommend a support.
So just to clarify for the board, so this essentially would allow the board to increase fees based on what the CPI increases over the last 4 years without having to go through that rulemaking process. Now, this wouldn't preclude the board from being able to continue to use the rulemaking process to increase fees if it's necessary to increase it at a greater percentage rate. Staff believe that this is an excellent tool and resource. However, we would like to recommend the board take a support if amended position, the amendment to clarify that this would be a resource or a tool in addition to the board's usual rulemaking authority, and that this wouldn't take the board's rulemaking authority away. And this has moved on to the second house, so this bill is gaining momentum, and several other boards are discussing it and taking positions as well.
Assembly Bill 768. It would allow the Department of Consumer Affairs to charge for a certified copy of any record, document, or paper. At this point, there would be no impact to the dental board, as the existing code in the Dental Practice Act already sets these amounts for the Board of California.
Additionally, this bill seems to have stalled out in the Assembly Policy Committee and does not appear to be continuing to move forward. We recommend a watch position.
Assembly Bill 1622. It requires the committee to include family physician, the word family physicians. It has been amended, but at this point it only affects the Medical Board of California and the Board of Registered Nursing, and it does not affect the Dental Practice Act. At this point, it does not impact the dental board.
There is an impact on the dental board, although it's very minor. So you'll recall from the Caleb's Law bill that passed that there was an informed consent provision added to unprofessional conduct. And so what this bill does is it essentially adds the term family physician to that informed consent to basically informing patients that they should solicit advice from their family physician or their dentist when seeking anesthesia treatment. At this point, it's a minor and absorbable bill. It is moving forward. It is in an assembly and being read for the third time. At this time, we would recommend a watch position.
Senate Bill 653. It currently affects the registered dental hygienist in alternative practice. It doesn't affect the board at this time, but we wanted to bring it to your attention. At this time, there's no impact to the board.
Essentially, as we understand it, it would authorize an RDH to provide without supervision fluoride varnish to a patient and to provide services and oral screenings at specified sponsored events and nonprofit organizations. It also authorizes an RDHAP to practice in specified clinics or in a professional corporation without being an employee of that clinic or professional corporation. So at this time, it does not impact the dental board itself, and staff doesn't have a recommendation on a position.
Okay, so members, you have heard this group of bills. Are there questions? And is that a new one? So,
Yes, just have a quick question. So how is that last bill, SB 653, how's that going to be affected with the Dynamax case that was discussed yesterday? How, I believe that it was mentioned that like dental hygienists cannot be independent contractors, but they have to be employee. But here it's saying that dental hygienists, in alternative practice, could work as an independent contractor. So I'm just wondering how that's going to be resolved.
We would have to research that at this point.
other questions?
I can actually speak to Dr. Lay's question. When we were negotiating with CDHA, this came up, and our understanding of the bill is whatever AB 5 or any other thing that would come through, that would trump anything that's written in this bill in terms of whether or not an RDHAP would be an independent contractor. This bill wouldn't supersede anything else.
There other public comment? So now we can take these one at a time, or we can have staff repeat the position on each one and vote on them as a group. Okay. Okay.
So
AB 193.
Staff recommends a watch position.
Okay.
AB 544, staff recommends a watch position. AB 613, staff recommends a support if amended to clarify that this is in addition to the board's current rulemaking authority to increase fees. AB 768, we recommend a watch position. AB 1622, we recommend a watch position. And SB 653, we do not recommend taking a position.
Okay. So I am going to offer a motion that we watch AB 193, that we watch AB 544, that we take a support if amended position on AB 613. And I would add to that staff get a letter out to the author as soon as possible. Take a watch position on AB 768 and a watch position on AB 1622 and no position on SB 653. So that's the motion. Is there a second?
Second, Stewart.
Second, Stewart. Any questions? I'm going to call for the vote.
Burton.
Yes.
Aye. Chan, aye. Chappelle Ingram, absent. Lai.
Yes.
Lai, yes. Laren. Laren, yes. Lay. Lay, yes. Mackenzie. Mackenzie, yes. Medina. Absent. Morrow. Morrow, yes. Alagi. Absent. Pacheco. Pacheco, yes. Stewart.
Yes.
Stewart, yes. Witcher. Witcher, yes. You, yes. Motion passes.
Thank you. So for the next set of bills, staff has identified these bills as being of potential interest. but do not directly impact the board. So unless someone wants to pull one of these and is prepared to give us your arguments and suggestions, then these are here just for your information. Does anyone want to pull any of these bills? Is there any public comment on this group? Thank you. So that brings us then to item C. And item C is something that is standard, that has been a part of our agenda for some time. And that is, this is your opportunity if there are prospective legislative proposals that you'd like to bring forward. Stakeholders are encouraged to submit that in writing for possible consideration at the next meeting. Any comments, questions on that? Brings us to item 20, page 244. And these are pending regulatory packages. Page 244.
Good afternoon. In the meeting materials, you'll find a memorandum updating you on the status of the various regulatory packages that the board has taken action to approve language. Essentially at this time, as Karen previously reported, we no longer have any legislative and regulatory analysts. We are in the process of recruiting for those positions, so we're trying to make do in the interim. However, prior to, I believe you remember Michael Chen from a previous meeting, Michael had drafted several of the initial rulemaking documents for all of these rulemakings and had submitted them to the prior legal counsel and was in the process of working with our prior legal counsel on those amendments before he left as well. So we are now in the process of resubmitting these regulatory packages to our new legal counsel and to have them review. And as you know, these packages now need to go through a pre-notice review process where they are reviewed by the department and agency prior to us being able to file with OAL for the 45-day comment period. So the packages that we're currently in the process of resubmitting to our new legal counsel to have reviewed include the basic life support equivalency standards, the citation and fine, the continuing education requirements, the determination of radiographs and placements of ITR, which was mentioned earlier by Dr. Witcher. The board had previously taken an approved position. The diversion committee membership, which was a reg package from the last meeting, as well as our elective facial cosmetic surgery permit program and our law and ethics exam, as well as our mobile and portable dental units, minimum standards for infection control, and the substantial relationship criteria. So the only regulatory package left is the dental assisting comprehensive rulemaking package, which at this point staff are planning to work with the Dental Assisting Council to have a special one-day meeting in Sacramento, most likely on a Friday, sometime in late June or in July, for the purpose of reviewing the rulemaking, proposed rulemaking language, and to go through and vet through that entire rulemaking package. Now, the hope is that the Dental Assisting Council will at that time be able to make a recommendation to bring the proposal to the full board at hopefully the August meeting, so that we can move forward with the approval of that package and get that submitted also to the department to initiate that pre-review process. So that concludes the update for today. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Public comment? Thank you. So now we are at item 21.
We close the party again. Good afternoon. The Licensing Certification Permits Committee met yesterday in closed session and considered 2 applicants in the DDS category and 8 candidates in the RDA category. And this is for the issuance of a new license to replace a canceled one. Committee members with information from staff recommendations approved of the following candidates as follows. In the DDS category, initials LTM and BJR will be required to take the California Dentistry Law and Ethics exam to complete their application. RDA's initials LDB, MVC, PVG, TDL, GDM, NMB, MP, and EE will all have to complete and pass RDA General Law and Ethics combined written exam to complete their applications. All candidates will be given a new license to replace a canceled one after completing the examination requirements. I request that the full board support my committee's findings and approve our combined report. Thank you.
Questions? Dr. Witcher?
Don't get nervous. I won't
We're
bite.
almost there. You went through that pretty quickly. Were there any RDA applications that were not required to take the written law and ethics exam?
No. All
have to take
are required, and we had great conversation and vetted certain reasonings behind our decisions for them to take the exam, and all of them are required to take the exam, in my opinion.
I mean, I don't want to reopen the discussion, but there was one that had been licensed as recently as 2013.
Dr. Witcher, do you know the initials?
Yeah, let me have that, and then I can explain.
Last name initial was B. It was toward the end of the packet, I think second to the last.
LMB? Or LB? LDB? NMB, correct. Okay, based on that recommendation, she was, I guess, a foreign trained doctor, a dentist that came here and worked in a medical office for six years, 5 years, and then came back to the dental field. So I think the reason behind that was as a practicing dentist outside the United States and coming back and doing medical office work and then back to dental assisting, a lot has changed, and the rules in California have changed since 2010. So everything's changed in 2010. So even though she is obviously qualified as an assistant, there are a lot of laws and rules that maybe are not familiar with her.
It was just a question, that's fine.
And she hasn't practiced since March of 2013. I was just informed. So I think she needs to at least show and satisfy the staff and the board that she is qualified to receive her license again, because she had it a long time ago. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And before we go to a vote, we actually want to probably separate out the RDA MYP, since there was, so Dr. Lai had recused himself on that one. Isn't it? I thought it was MYP. Okay, which one? Oh, I'm sorry. Yep, it is the last one. Which I did. Yeah, I was looking at the last one, but a different last one. Sorry. What was it? EEP. Let's vote on that one separately in order to allow you.
Correct.
To
I recused myself from the last candidate because I worked with her sister at Highland Hospital at the time.
That's MP.
EE, the last one. E.
Sorry.
Initials EE.
Okay. Okay. So we are going to accept for initials EP. Sorry. Vote on the rest of these as a group, the recommendations as a group. Is there a motion?
I'll move it, Witcher.
Okay. Moved by Witcher.
second, Mackenzie.
Any questions? Let's call for the vote.
So we're voting on the recommendation as the group first. Burton.
Aye.
Burton, aye. Chan, aye. Chappelle Ingram, absent. Lai.
Yes.
Lai, yes. Laren. Laren, yes. Lay. Lay, yes. Mackenzie. Mackenzie, yes. Medina. Medina, yes. Morrow. Morrow, yes. Olagi, absent. Pacheco. Pacheco, yes. Stewart.
Yes.
Stewart, yes. Witcher. Witcher, yes. You, yes. Have a pass.
Thank you. Now let's take up EE. And I'm going to move it. Second.
Second, Mackenzie.
Second, Mackenzie. Questions? Call for a vote.
All right. Burton.
Yes.
Burton, aye. Chan, aye. Chappelle Ingram, absent. Lai.
Abstain.
Abstain or recuse?
Recuse. Recuse, excuse me.
Laren? Laren, yes. Lay? Lay, yes. Mackenzie? Mackenzie, yes. Medina? Medina, yes. Morrow? Morrow, yes. Olagi, absent. Pacheco? Pacheco, yes. Stewart?
Yes.
Stewart, yes. Witcher? Witcher, yes. You? You, yes. Motion passes.
Item 22, board member comments on items not on the agenda.
For future agenda, right? To be seen. Yes, I'd like to speak a little bit about a procedure that's been used more and more lately in dentistry. Mostly oral surgeons do this, and it's a surgical procedure which requires extraction of blood with a phlebotomy, and it's called platelet-rich plasma procedure. What you do is you take the blood out, you put it in a centrifuge, and then you extract a solution that helps with healing the wound. But apparently there's been conflicting answers from the board itself. If a dentist can actually do the phlebotomy procedure, because that requires on itself a license if you were not a dentist, but I guess two people have called. One was the CE department of one of the universities here, and they were told that it was not allowed to do this. They want to teach this in the school, and they were told that it was out of the scope of dentistry. And then a different person called, and they were told that it's allowed to do it if you're going to use it for dentistry, for the purpose of dentistry. And I know you have more information on this, Dr. Witcher, but we just need to clarify this issue a little bit more so people are aware, because it is much, much more popular. So maybe some dentists are doing it that are not supposed to be doing it, or maybe they are, but they're just not sure. But for example, they want to teach this at a university, and they were told they couldn't do it. So,
say the name of the procedure again.
The platelet-rich plasma procedure, but it's more the phlebotomy part of it. That's the part that it's the conflict. It's not so much the procedure itself where you replace it in the grafting. It's not that part. It's mostly extracting the blood.
And is that all the information you have on it?
Well, we just need a little bit more clarification, because if it can or cannot be done, so they can go ahead and teach it, possibly at the universities or at CE courses.
This is the first I've heard of it. Typically, our staff have been directed not to give advice like that. So we will check into that, and I'll talk to the board president after we start to gather information and see if this is an item that can be agendized for a future meeting.
And I would ask further if there is somebody that staff can consult for more information on that, and you have that, or you know someone who has that, we'd appreciate having that information.
Thank you. We also have a dental consultant in our office who is an employee. This is a procedure I'm somewhat familiar with in terms of it's come up in discipline, actually. So we'll look into it further and see whether it's something that can be brought back.
Anyone else? Okay. Well, we actually got through this. And as Len Berman says, nobody got hurt. At least I don't think. Thank you all so much. And we will meet again in the fall. So this meeting is adjourned.